It's been 6 years since I last stepped foot in that house in New Orleans, and even now, thinking about it makes the hair on my neck stand up. It all started when I was 13. My dad had fallen in love and married my stepmom. She was wonderful, like an answer to our prayers, and being closer to my dad's work. He moved in with her in New Orleans. A year after they married, they decided they wanted to expand our family, and they found an incredible New Orleans-style house to make it our home. It was an old, beautiful house, and we were thrilled because the entire upstairs was for us kids. Me, my sister, and my brother. It had 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, and even a living room just for us. At first, it felt like a dream, but soon, it turned into a nightmare. We only stayed with my dad every other weekend, so it took a while before we started noticing something was off. It began as a creeping, negative feeling every time we went upstairs. The moment we reached the top of the staircase, we'd feel this intense sensation of being watched, like something was lurking there, observing us. Friends who visited regularly refused to go upstairs alone. One friend was so scared she even wet herself at night because she couldn't bear the thought of going to the bathroom alone. My little sister was terrified to sleep in her own room, so she'd stay in my bed every night. One night, I couldn't fall asleep and was lying in bed when I suddenly noticed her moving. When I looked over, she was sitting straight up, staring at the wall, eyes wide open. I tried calling her name, but she didn't respond. It was like she was in a trance, completely unreachable. Although it only lasted a few minutes, it felt like hours. Then, as she slowly lay back down, I heard banging coming from inside my closet, as if something was trapped inside and trying to get out. When I asked her about it the next day, she had no memory of anything that happened. I was so shaken by the experience that I moved my dresser in front of the closet door, hoping it would somehow keep whatever was inside from getting out. A few weeks later, my sister was sitting at my vanity, doing her makeup. I had 2 doors in my room, one that led to the living room and another that opened to the hallway and also led to the attic. From where I was standing, I could see the attic door. As my sister was talking about how scared she felt in the house and how she thought it was haunted, I tried to reassure her, saying, "There's no such thing as ghosts." The moment those words left my mouth, the doorknob on the attic door started to rattle, and then the door flew open. I don't think we've ever run so fast in our lives. My brother, who lived with my dad full-time, also had his own experiences in that room. One weekend while we were at our mom's, he heard my sound machine playing in my bedroom. When he went to turn it off, he found it was unplugged with no batteries in it. He left the house, and when he came back later, the sound had stopped. Eventually, we were so afraid to sleep upstairs that we started camping out on the pull-out couch downstairs. The downstairs felt safer somehow, but early every morning, as the sun was coming up, we'd wake up to the sound of someone running up and down the upstairs hall. It became a regular occurrence, and we never found an explanation. Those were some of the most terrifying experiences we had in that house. My dad and stepmom always denied anything unusual, probably trying to keep us calm and comfortable. But when they finally moved, they admitted they had thought the house was haunted too. They'd had some unsettling experiences themselves, though nothing like what we'd been through. Most of the activity seemed to happen upstairs, where they rarely went. After they moved, they shared that the previous owners had been an older couple who both passed away in the house. They had a special needs child who had also died young. The house had been in that family since it was built, and we were only the second owners. To this day, I'll never forget the fear I felt in that house. It's a feeling that stays with me, lingering, like the presence we always felt in those dark, shadowed halls. When I first moved to New Orleans, I was lucky to find a place in the French Quarter at an incredible price. To understand what happened there, a quick description of the layout is helpful. Most homes in the French Quarter have a main house with separate servants' quarters in the back, and I was renting the entire servants' quarters. At the time, the main house was undergoing renovations. Between the main house and my quarters was a small courtyard with a fountain, a table with chairs, and a mature magnolia tree. To the side of the main house was a driveway with a tall, solid metal electronic gate topped with barbed wire, a common sight in the quarter to keep out intoxicated wanderers. The courtyard was bordered on each side by the 25-foot-tall brick walls of neighboring buildings, with no windows or entrances on those walls. The servants' quarters itself ran along the back of the property, with its only windows and doors facing the courtyard. It had a kitchen, living room, and a small bathroom downstairs, plus 2 bedrooms and another bathroom upstairs. An exterior spiral staircase led up to a narrow, covered balcony or gallery that ran the length of the second floor. It was classic New Orleans, beautiful, but it held a darker side. My dog hated this house. Normally, he was a calm, easygoing mutt who didn't bark or get into trouble. But from the moment we moved in, he became a completely different dog. He developed extreme separation anxiety, would have meltdowns whenever I left, and started to mess in the house regularly, despite our usual walking routine. It was strange. This was our 4th or 5th move together, but he'd never reacted like this before. The vet had no explanations either. Sometimes I'd watch him stare intently at something unseen, tracking it with his eyes, occasionally letting out a low, deep growl. One time he went over to a closet, lay down in front of it, and just waited, as if something were inside. I sat with him, listening for any signs of movement. Maybe a mouse, I thought, but there was nothing. During my dad's visit, he told me about something he experienced on his last night there. Just after he lay down, he heard a noise in his room. He turned and saw the carpet slowly bunching and sliding across the floor, as if something were pulling it. He said it lasted about 30 seconds but felt like forever. He was so terrified he couldn't move. When he finally regained his composure, he turned on a lamp and read a book for the rest of the night, vowing he wouldn't stay in the house on his next visit. I suggested it might have been sleep paralysis, but he dismissed it. He was familiar with sleep paralysis and said this was completely different. He hadn't even fallen asleep yet and could breathe fine. He said it was pure terror that froze him as he watched that carpet move. One evening, I was in my bedroom getting dressed after a shower when I heard something running along the gallery outside my window. The footsteps sounded light but had weight, like a child running. They started at the stairs near my room and faded out as they reached the second bedroom. I felt the vibrations and saw the curtains shake as they passed. My dog began growling, and I grabbed the knife I kept by my bed. I checked everywhere, the roof, the stairs, the tree, but found nothing. It was a heavy, still late summer afternoon, one of those sticky August or September days without even a breeze to disturb the quiet. The final and most intense experience happened about a month before I moved out. I was sitting in the courtyard, enjoying a glass of wine and a book. My dog was lying at my feet, and it was perfectly silent until 3 loud knocks rang out on the living room window. I could hear the rattling of the window pane as it moved in its frame. I looked up just in time to see the glass vibrate from the last knock. My dog went ballistic, barking furiously at the window. I grabbed my wine glass, ready to use it as a makeshift weapon, and checked the entire house. I knew there was no back entrance and that the electronic gate took at least a minute to open, making a loud racket. The main house was empty, no workers stayed late. I stood in the doorway, and in a clear, loud voice, I said that I understood we were sharing the space but asked it to please avoid scaring us like that again. Nothing else happened during that last month, and I haven't had any experiences like those since. Looking back, I still feel a chill thinking about what could have been moving around in that house. I'm not a full believer in the paranormal, so I'm open to ideas on what might explain these strange events, but so far, I haven't found anything that quite fits. Since I left my cemetery groundskeeping job, things were peaceful. But recently, something uninvited has arrived in my house, and I'm trying to figure out whether it's been attracted by my bad luck or maybe even came through a TV show. Started about 2 months ago in July. On July 14th, I went out to grab some boiled crabs, and in the 15 minutes I was gone, my house was robbed. Most of my guns were safely locked away, including my grandfather's old guns, but still, the timing was brutal. This all happened just 4 days before my wedding. To add to it, my wife's family owns a security company, so we got a quick hookup on a system, which will come into play later in this story. That Saturday we got married, and then I went into anaphylactic shock at the reception. My well-meaning mother-in-law had put imitation crab dip on my plate, then took it off without mentioning it to me, which is a problem since I'm deathly allergic to fish. The rest of the night was uneventful in the bedroom department. Popping Benadryl has some side effects, setting the tone for our honeymoon. The next day, we headed out for the honeymoon and were rear-ended at a red light. My wife was shaken, so no romance that night either. Then, when we finally hit the beach, we were swarmed by jellyfish and stingrays. So, needless to say, they were the only ones getting any action that day. On our way home, we learned my wife was getting sued by the people who'd rear-ended her the month before. Fortunately, that worked out, but things didn't improve much when I returned to work. I work in a highly stressful environment with challenging situations, but without the kind of security people in similar jobs have. No tasers, no pepper spray, no handcuffs. I do my best to leave work at work, but the stress sometimes follows me home. And just a month ago, I found out I developed type 2 diabetes with some kidney damage and gout. The news hit me hard, both financially and emotionally. Then, last weekend, I was watching the Dead Files when I started feeling what I usually sense when a spirit is nearby. A prickling feeling with hair standing up on my arms. I tried to ignore it, but it kept coming and going in waves. Later that night, I got up to use the bathroom and saw a black mass in the hallway. I was wide awake, and this thing had a human shape with a faint yellow glow around it. It looked like it was peering at me from the bedroom doorway, leaning out as if trying to stay hidden but curious. The sight lasted only a second or two before it vanished, but I was so rattled I decided to pee outside rather than walk down that hallway. The next day, I brushed it off as maybe my blood pressure making me see spots. I discovered the diabetes after a gout attack, and my BP has been through the roof at 230/115. But then the noises started. At first, the sounds were faint, like tapping or brushing, but over the following days, they became more distinct, banging and scraping. Strangely, they only happen when I'm alone. My wife has never been around to hear them. Then yesterday, things took a turn. I was in the bathroom when I heard a loud noise from the kitchen. I thought it was another break-in, so I grabbed my 1911, ready to confront someone. But the alarm was still set in stay mode, which should prevent anyone from getting in without triggering it. I found my knives knocked off the kitchen counter, with no one in sight. Our motion detectors don't set off the alarm in stay mode, but they do register movement. I checked the logs and they showed movement in the hallway, then the living room, and then, finally, the kitchen where the knives had been. This all happened while I was sitting and stressing over a rough day at work, as if something had keyed in on my frustration. So now, I'm trying to figure out if something from the TV show latched onto me, or if I've somehow created a poltergeist with all the stress I've been dealing with. I hope it's not the latter because I'm close to my breaking point. I haven't told my wife any of this. I try to keep my work stress away from her. She doesn't need to be burdened by the worst of what I see every day. I also doubt she'd understand if I told her about the strange events happening at home. So for now, I'm keeping it to myself. As I went to submit this, I heard knocks from the closet just 2 feet away from me. All my life, I felt things. Presences, moments, messages I couldn't quite explain. My earliest memory of this was when I'd lie in bed at night and see the silhouette of a woman with a parasol standing in my bedroom doorway. Sometimes she had 2 little girls with her. Their forms were never clear or lifelike, but somehow they didn't frighten me. They were just there, always present, as if they'd been part of my life all along. I never mentioned it to my parents. It was simply a part of my world. As I got older, I saw her less and less. But then, I entered a marriage to a man who became abusive. That's when I started seeing her again, this time with a faint blue glow surrounding her. She'd often stand in the corner of my bedroom, watching, especially after particularly terrible fights. Her presence felt like a quiet comfort, as if she were waiting for me to gather the courage to leave. One day, when I was alone, I heard a loud crash from the kitchen. Startled, I went to check and found a heavy glass cake stand, which had been far back on the counter, shattered in the middle of the kitchen floor. There was no reason it should have fallen on its own. I cleaned up the mess, brushed it off as strange, and tried to carry on with my day. That night, I dreamed of her. This time, she looked just like a real person. She had brown hair and beautiful, sad eyes, and she told me I needed to get out, warning that my life would end up like the broken cake stand. shattered and broken, if I didn't leave. Her message was clear and I took it to heart. The next night, I had another vivid dream. I entered a house I'd never seen before. Inside one room were 2 twin beds, purple bedspreads, and a desk with little toys on it. There was a kitchen with 1960s-style decor, a bowl of fresh fruit on the table, and a picture of JFK on the wall. I met a little girl there, wearing a yellow dress and sporting a pageboy haircut. She told me her name, talked about school, and giggled as she spoke. She told me her little sister was too shy to come say hello. At the end of the dream, the little girl kissed my cheek, and I felt it as if she'd been real. It was so vivid, so strangely comforting. With time, I found the courage to leave my husband. I went through the difficult process of filing restraining orders, pressing charges, and securing a divorce. It was a dark, traumatic period, but often, I'd see a blue glow in the corner of my bedroom. Knowing she was there allowed me to sleep a little easier. After I left, I kept one item from our marriage, a china plate we'd bought on our honeymoon, which I'd hung in my living room. One day, when I got home from work, I found it broken neatly in half, lying just inside the front door. I was vigilant about security, and no one else had access to my home. Shaken, I picked up the 2 pieces and threw them in the outside trash bin. That night, she visited me one last time. She told me she'd broken the plate because I no longer needed reminders of that marriage. She said goodbye, assuring me that I was going to be okay now. Later, I shared the story with my parents. My father, who's never been one to believe in the paranormal, went pale when I told him the name of the little girl. He rarely spoke of his family, and we'd had no real contact with them. Quietly, he told me he'd had a great aunt with 2 little girls who were murdered by her abusive husband in their home in the mid-1960s. I believe it was her. I didn't mention their names out of respect for my family, but I think she'd been there watching over me, protecting me from the time I was young. Once she'd helped me escape. It was as if she'd completed her purpose and could finally rest. I've never seen her or the girls again, and I hope they're at peace now. Growing up in St. John's Parish, Louisiana, I spent my childhood in my grandparents' big plantation house with a guest house nearby. Our home was always bustling with relatives, drawn by the cooler rooms and a little creek that ran through the property where us kids would cool off on hot summer days. With 15 cousins and 9 aunts and uncles on my mother's side, there was no shortage of company and adventure. The house itself was an old plantation home that my grandpa Joshua inherited from his uncle Maurice when he married my grandma Marlena. It was beautiful, but it had its own mysteries and hauntings. Stories I'll save for another time. Summers in Louisiana meant intense heat, humidity, and plenty of bugs. But for us kids, it also meant freedom from school and endless play with whichever cousins turned up. We were all a bit daring, but I was the biggest tomboy of the bunch, always first to climb a tree or take on a dare, to my parents' horror. They worried about me keeping up with the boys, but I could outclimb and outwrestle them anyway. We loved exploring the plantation and its surroundings, staying close enough to hear anyone calling us in, but far enough to feel like we had our own world without adults. Down the road was an old fishing and hunting shack by a larger stream, and my cousins Peter, Mitch, Vince, and I found it the perfect hideaway. Since it wasn't occupied, we made it our clubhouse. My grandparents knew about the place and warned us to be careful of the rotten boards, but otherwise gave us the freedom to use it. Grandma, or Grammy as we called her, even made curtains for the windows, and Grandpa gave us some old furniture. A table, for chairs, and a small cupboard for our supplies. Later, we even got fishing poles and a small icebox for drinks. It was a one-room shack, and with all the furniture, there was barely space to move, but to us, it was perfect. We spent those summer days fishing, exploring the woods, and bringing back our catch to Grammy, who would fry it up for us. She always praised our catches like we were real hunters. It was my cousin Vince who first noticed the shack's peculiarities. Sometimes, we'd leave the chairs tucked in at the table, only to find them pulled out like someone had been sitting there. Other times, the windows we'd left open were shut, with the shades drawn. We'd always check with each other, but we all knew none of us had done it. One day, Vince was sitting at the shack, holding the fishing poles while his brother Mitch went back to the house for the bathroom. Peter and I were further downstream picking blackberries when we heard a loud splash and a yelp. Dropping our buckets, we ran back to find Vince climbing out of the stream, soaking wet. Furious, he shouted, "Who pushed me? It's not funny." Peter and I looked at each other and said, "We were downstream. Wasn't us." Vince looked around, searching for Mitch, who hadn't returned yet. When Mitch finally came back, Vince told him what happened, but Mitch was as confused as we were, insisting he hadn't been there. Vince went pale as he explained. He'd heard footsteps behind him and was about to turn around when he felt a sharp push, sending him into the stream. He hadn't seen anyone but was convinced something or someone was messing with him. After that, he was so spooked he wouldn't come back for nearly a week. We tried telling our parents, but they just laughed, thinking it was all kid stuff and jokes. But we knew none of us had pushed Vince. So who or what had? Other strange things started happening. 1. Sometimes, while we fished on the dock, we'd hear heavy footsteps pacing back and forth inside the shack. It was impossible for anyone to be moving in there with all the furniture we'd packed inside. 2. When we were separated from each other, we'd hear someone calling our names, telling us to come back to the main house because someone needed us. The voice always sounded like Grandpa, but when we'd rush back, everyone would say they hadn't called for us. 3. Food and toys would move or go missing entirely, only to reappear later in strange places. One time, a yo-yo that belonged to Mitch vanished, and when it reappeared days later, the string was missing. We never found it. Another time, a fishing creel disappeared for the whole summer, only to show up broken on the last day we were there. That was the last full summer we lived in Louisiana. Just before I turned 10, my parents moved us to Nashville for my dad's job. We visited the next summer, but by then, a storm had blown the shack down just before Thanksgiving. All that remained was the dock. We never knew who or what haunted that shack. Rumor had it that my grandpa's old neighbor, a man named Ellis Moritz, had built the place in the early 1900s. He and his son Cliff spent all their free time there until their deaths in the 30s and 60s. Maybe they weren't too happy about a bunch of rowdy kids taking over. Grandpa passed away in 1979 from cancer, and Grammy followed in 1988 due to heart issues from diabetes. The property passed to my aunt and uncle, but the main house eventually burned down in the 90s. Only the guest house remains and some family members still stay there. I haven't returned since Grammy passed. I have no reason to, but every so often, I still have strange dreams about that shack. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I've always had paranormal experiences in my life, but things became intense when I got pregnant with my daughter in 2010. I met her father through a friend, and though we dated for a while, he was an Iraqi veteran with PTSD, and we agreed it would be best to stay friends as he dealt with his issues. About a month later, I found out I was pregnant. Given my medical history, a tubal pregnancy in 2005 and a doctor's warning that I had less than a 10% chance of conceiving again, it felt like a miracle. But her father reacted badly, accusing me of cheating and telling me to get an abortion. I stood my ground and decided to keep her, weathering his emotional roller coaster as he swung between wanting to be involved and pulling away. I tried to chalk it up to his PTSD and kept going. One night, when we were on decent terms, he invited my son and me to stay over. After everyone had gone to bed, I stayed up, playing a game on his computer. Suddenly, I heard a whisper telling me to get out. I checked the room, but everyone was asleep, so I brushed it off, saying out loud, "Thanks, but I was invited." Moments later, I felt something watching me, and I said, "Sorry, but I'm here until tomorrow. You can go away now." Then the computer turned itself off. Refusing to be spooked, I turned it back on out of defiance, finished my game, and went to bed. When I told him about it the next morning, he shrugged it off, blaming it on our constant fighting and my hormones. In November, at 4 months along, my great-uncle fell ill. My mom and I dropped my son off at his dad's for Thanksgiving, and on the way home from the hospital, I felt like something had attached itself to me. When my uncle passed a few weeks later, I was sure of it. I sensed this presence more and more, a feeling that grew stronger with each fight I had with her father. Strangely, I found the spirit's presence calming, as though it were trying to help me. In January, I visited her father's family, and as soon as I walked in, their dog went nuts, avoiding me the entire time. I chose to ignore it, thinking it best not to overthink things. But as Mardi Gras rolled around, I had to make a 3-hour drive alone to drop off my son. On the way back, I got stuck in traffic, and suddenly, a crushing feeling of loneliness hit me. I pulled over, tears streaming down my face, and called her father, who calmed me down and talked to me until I got home safely. The next day, I learned that a tornado had touched down just 5 miles from where my son was staying, killing a woman who was protecting her child. I couldn't shake the feeling that my spirit had left to protect him. I had my daughter in April 2011, and by June, her father cut off contact entirely. He has never tried to see her or provided any support. Since then, the spirit's presence has faded, but I find myself filled with an overwhelming protectiveness toward my daughter. I can't sleep unless she's right next to me, and I've only spent a handful of nights away from her since she was born. My focus on her has taken a toll on my relationship with my son, who I worry may feel sidelined by my constant attention to his sister. Last year, I started dating my current boyfriend, and things were fine initially. But after I was in a minor car accident in January, things began to unravel. I had to quit my job, and in April, my boyfriend got laid off. He recently found work but has to travel now, and the first night he left, I had intense nightmares. I can't remember them, but I wake up feeling tense, sweating, and angry. Last night, I even threw myself out of bed, only to wake up with the sensation that someone was standing over me, holding me down. All morning, I've been trying to stay busy to shake off this feeling, but I can't escape this sense of dread. I feel drained, exhausted, and worse, I feel like my daughter and I are not alone in this house. This experience happened when I was 16. I was living in an old house in a small town, staying with a friend's family since they lived closer to my school. The house had wooden floors throughout except for the kitchen, which had linoleum flooring. Both the front and back doors were directly aligned along the length of the house, forming a straight line from front to back. The back door only opened onto a fenced backyard. One night, I was home alone around 8 p.m., lying on my bed and reading. The bedroom had 2 doors, one leading to the living room and the other to the kitchen, both on the same wall. Suddenly, I heard the locked front door swing open and then heavy footsteps, as if someone in thick-heeled boots had entered the house. I listened as the footsteps continued down the hallway toward me, and then the front door slammed shut behind them, like it had swung open and closed by itself. I held my breath, frozen, as the footsteps grew louder, stopping right outside my closed bedroom door. I remember thinking, if he knows I'm here, I'm done for. I didn't dare move or try to hide, afraid that any movement would give me away. I just watched the doorknob, waiting to see if it would turn. Then, after a tense moment, the footsteps continued, moving past my door and down the hallway. I exhaled only once I heard them reach the second bedroom door. What happened next was even stranger. When the footsteps entered the kitchen, they sounded just as heavy and clear as they did on the wooden floors. I'd have thought the linoleum would absorb some of the sound, but it didn't. And as they reached the back door, I heard it swing open, though the door had been locked. Whoever it was didn't seem to stop or hesitate, as if the door just opened for them. The footsteps continued out, and then I heard the back door slam shut. Terrified, I bolted out the front door and ran 5 blocks to the local police station. I told them someone had walked through the house and might still be in the backyard. The police came and checked the doors, the house, and the yard, but found no sign of forced entry or anyone on the property. Seeing the fear on my face, one officer said, "You know these houses are old, right?" I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but he suggested I talk to the owner about what happened. The next morning, my friend had already told her mother what had happened. We sat around the kitchen table and I explained what I'd heard. Her mother listened patiently, then told me that the house was over 112 years old. She said it was more likely that it was a ghost than an intruder and suggested the spirit might not have even known I was there. I remember laughing, thinking how absurd that sounded. Now, looking back, I'm not so sure. Although I've had strange experiences throughout my life, my family never spoke about ghosts, so I hadn't connected it to anything paranormal at the time. I've since come to believe that this could have been a residual haunting. The sounds of footsteps didn't change even when they moved from the wooden floor to the linoleum, as if they were replaying in a loop. But that still doesn't explain why the footsteps stopped at my door or how the doors opened and closed on their own. Just as a side note, I refer to the presence as he because I could sense a male energy. It's a certain feeling, a kind of energy I've always been able to pick up on, that gave me that impression. My family and I moved into a house in Opelousas, on a part of town locals called the Trash Pile, not far from Holy Ghost Catholic Church. It was an odd place, and at night we'd sometimes hear footsteps in the hallway and voices around the house. I told my mom about it, but she just laughed it off, insisting there were no ghosts in the house. So, I brushed off the noises, assuming I was just on edge from living in a new place. One day, I was outside with a friend, standing on what I thought was the walkway leading to the front steps. I happened to look down and my jaw dropped. Beneath some worn doormats were partially destroyed graves. 2 long, vertical marble slabs with French writing on them. Shocked, I asked my friend, "Are those graves?" The names on the graves were Francois Nada and Felician. I don't remember Felician's last name or the exact dates, but I do recall they were from the 1700s. My dad later told us they'd found out about the graves by asking the landlord. None of us spoke French, but with the internet's help, I managed to translate a few words. "Here lies." That alone was enough to make me want to get out of there. But my family didn't seem too bothered, and they left the doormats over the graves, walking on them as if they were just part of the walkway. I couldn't believe I'd been unknowingly walking over graves, thinking it was just concrete. They were set right in front of the porch, as if deliberately placed to resemble a path. In hindsight, I should have noticed something was off. Whenever it rained, the surface became slick, and we'd slide if we weren't careful. It was definitely not concrete. We eventually learned that the landlord's father had built the house himself and designed the graves to blend in as if they were part of the walkway. Clever, maybe, but definitely unsettling. I decided to research Francois and Felician, curious to know who they were. I found out Francois was a plantation owner from France, one of the first respected businessmen in Opelousas, and he'd even served as mayor. He was buried on his own land. I couldn't find any information on Felician, but I wanted to know more about the spirits I might be sharing the house with. Being curious about the paranormal, my brother, cousin, and I decided to do a little investigation. I was too nervous to take pictures, but we did catch an EVP of 2 or more women having a conversation. My brother, freaked out, insisted we delete the recordings and leave it alone. So we did. It wasn't long before the house's activity ramped up. We started experiencing touches, more frequent noises, and clearer voices than ever before. One night, with friends over, we watched as 3 glasses on the table split perfectly in half without being touched. There was no dramatic temperature change or anyone near the glasses. They simply cracked on their own. Later that same night, I went to the bathroom and saw a tall, slim man dressed in period clothing. He didn't seem aggressive, but it scared me senseless. I'd never seen a ghost before, and that was enough for me. I moved in with my brother soon after. But I wasn't the only one who had seen the tall man. Others in the house glimpsed him too. He never acknowledged anyone, just seemed to move around in his own world. My mom was the only one who saw a different spirit, a young pregnant woman she thought was Felician. Unlike the tall man, Felician's spirit seemed aware of us and even tried to interact. One morning, my mom called me in tears, saying she couldn't take it anymore, and my dad still refused to believe her. That is, until the day they were alone in the house together and both heard a woman singing in the kitchen. After that, they finally decided it was time to move. Not long after they left, new tenants moved in, but they didn't stay long either. Looking back, I feel a bit guilty, wondering if we stirred things up by investigating. Maybe we should have left well enough alone. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, Let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Oh, I used to be someone who didn't believe in the paranormal. I thought it was just people imagining things. Now, after one unforgettable night, I can say with certainty that I was that person who didn't believe. Years ago, I decided to take a road trip from Texas to Key West, Florida, looking for an adventure and a fresh start after a tough breakup. I filled up my car and headed for the highway, planning to follow the coastline all the way down to Key West. When I hit the end of the road, I figured I'd find whatever I was searching for. After hours of driving, with the stripes on the road blurring together and my body feeling leaden from the long haul, I noticed a sign for a motel with a 24-hour diner just a few miles ahead. I pulled into the diner's lot, greeted by the scent of jasmine on the night breeze, mixed with the earthy aroma of the sea. Across the road was a bay, its shoreline littered with driftwood, dead leaves, and tangled cypress trees casting long, eerie shadows under a low-hanging moon. It was both beautiful and haunting. I was so tired that I barely took in my surroundings as I paid for a room. I was assigned room 2 at the Sportsman Lodge, which was right across a small gravel lot. I headed there, too exhausted to move my car, eager to shower and sleep. The room was small, but clean and cozy in a southern way, with a charm that instantly made me feel at ease. I took a warm shower, set the AC to medium. It was one of those old units with only 3 settings, and settled into the soft bed, which hugged my road-weary body. The sound of the AC humming and distant traffic lulled me to sleep. Some hours later, I woke up to an odd aura in the room, like a faint neon light casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air had grown icy, but I didn't want to leave the comfort of my warm blankets to turn down the AC. Then, suddenly, I felt the bed shift, as though someone had just sat down next to me. My heart started to pound. Was it a robber? A stranger breaking in? I froze, terrified, and then I felt a hand rest gently on my shoulder. I was lying on my side, so whoever or whatever it was seated right behind me. I tried to move, to turn and look, but found myself completely paralyzed. I tried to shout, but no sound came out. It felt like my entire body had been locked in place, and the fear was overwhelming. And then, soft lips pressed against my ear, and I felt a cool breath through my hair as a woman's voice whispered, "Emily, tell him to meet me in the other room." I was stunned. I wasn't Emily, nor was I female, so what did this woman want? Did she think I was someone else? Or was I just hearing things? And then, just as suddenly as it had all started, the room returned to normal. The air warmed, and I was able to move again, drenched in sweat, as if I'd just escaped some Arctic nightmare. I quickly turned on the lights, heart pounding, and checked every corner of the room. The AC was still set to medium. I was alone, the door and window both locked from the inside. I convinced myself it must have been a vivid nightmare. No alcohol, no drugs, no mental conditions. What had just happened? Finally calming down, I saw it was 2 a.m. and decided to try and get more sleep. I lay back down, and as I drifted off, my mind took me into a vivid dream. I was in a different time, standing by the bay in the warm sunlight, with cypress trees and horse-drawn buggies rolling down a freshly packed dirt road. There were women in flowing dresses, the ribbons on their bonnets fluttering as if in tune to a private melody, and men with capes and hats issuing orders to workers unloading crates from small boats. The colors, sounds, and smells were all so real, like I was watching a scene from the past. And then, just as quickly, I was ripped from that place back into the freezing chill of my room. I felt her presence again, the icy air returning, and once more, I felt the bed sink as she sat behind me. This time, though I was still afraid, I felt less terror, as though she meant no harm. Then came the cold breath and the familiar whisper, "Emily, tell him to meet me in the other room." The words haunted me, and questions flooded my mind. Who was she? Had she died at the hands of a lover? Was she waiting for someone who never came? Somehow, I sensed she didn't mean to frighten me. She was simply stuck, trapped in an endless loop. My fear shifted into sadness as I felt pity for her. This lonely spirit repeating a message, unable to move on. By morning, I was filled with a strange mix of sorrow and relief. As I packed my things, I took one last look around the room, the place where my deepest fears had been laid bare. As I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was reaching out, maybe even thanking me for listening. I felt an odd embrace, like she didn't want me to go. I stopped at the diner for coffee, and as I recounted my story to the waitress, she just nodded knowingly and said, "Honey, that motel's been haunted by a woman for as long as I can remember. Room 2's the worst. Had I known, even as a skeptic, I would have gone somewhere else." Now, years later, I've tried to find that motel again, hoping to return and maybe bring peace to this spirit. But I haven't had any luck finding it. So if anyone out there knows about the Sportsman Lodge in southern Louisiana, please let me know. I think I'd like to see her again, to somehow ease the sadness that lingers in such a beautiful, lonely place. When I was a young boy, I didn't believe in spirits. In fact, I thought people who did were just imagining things. My dad, though, had always been open about his own encounters. Once, when I was about 12 or 13, we went fishing, and suddenly he called out, "Where are you?" I asked him who he was talking to, and he said, "Didn't you hear someone calling for help out in the bayou?" I hadn't heard anything, but he continued, asking where this unseen person was. For years, I thought my dad was a little out there with all his spirit talk. Then, when I was 16, I had an experience of my own that changed everything. I came home from school one day and lay down for a nap. Just as I was drifting off, I felt the bed sink, as if someone had sat down. Thinking it was my sister playing a trick, I looked around, but no one was there. Then I felt a strange presence pacing back and forth along my legs. It would move from one side of the bed to the other, stopping at my groin, then moving back toward my feet, as if something was pacing between my legs. I was terrified. This was no imagination. I could feel every step, even though I couldn't see anything. That night, and many nights after, the presence would crawl into bed with me. When I tried to ignore it and go to sleep, it would speed up, running back and forth as though it wanted to keep me awake. But if I paid attention, it would calm down and slow its pace. The sensation was like tiny feet, almost like a cat's, but the idea of it terrified me. I dreaded going to bed, knowing it would join me each night. Even though I didn't see impressions on the mattress, I could feel each movement, each step, as if it was real. Finally, I told my mother, and she arranged for a priest to bless the house. But the priest didn't seem to believe me, and as he was leaving, he just said, "Son, I hope you get better." The presence became less frequent after that, and I eventually learned to tune it out, but it would come and go for several years before finally disappearing. Later, in my late 30s, I had another strange experience. I was visiting a friend and went to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I'm particular about making sure doors are locked, but suddenly, it popped open. I thought my friend was playing a prank, but he was still sitting on the sofa. I closed the door, locking it tightly, and again it swung open. I asked my friend if anything odd ever happened in the house, and he said, "Oh, the door moves sometimes," dismissing it as the air conditioning. But I knew what I felt. When I was 60, I had my first vision. It was of my childhood sweetheart's mother. For 3 days, I saw her. A black and white image that appeared in front of me and lingered throughout the day. Unlike my earlier experience, it wasn't frightening, and she didn't keep me awake at night. She just appeared, with a strange expression on her face, one that was neither happy nor sad. It felt like she was trying to communicate something, though she never spoke. Shortly afterward, I was driving my mother to dinner, and as I turned into a gas station, something unusual happened. A car door opened, revealing her last name handwritten across it in neat letters. It was an uncommon name, and the timing following my vision felt far beyond coincidence. I was stunned. Determined to understand why she'd appeared, I started reflecting on my past with her daughter, my high school sweetheart. I hadn't seen her since 1965, but I felt her mother had some message. So, I found my former sweetheart's address online, then sent her a letter, explaining what I'd seen, worried she'd think I was insane or trying to rekindle an old romance. She called me soon after, curious and open, even suggesting we meet, with both her husband's and my wife's blessings. As we spoke, I realized what her mother's expression had meant. The message she'd wanted to convey was that her daughter still loved me. When we finally met, my old girlfriend hugged me, kissed me, and said in front of her husband, "I love you." I was speechless, and her husband didn't even seem angry. He simply said, "Don't be a stranger. Come by sometime." Looking back, I think my sister may have played a role in our original breakup. She encouraged my girlfriend to go out and meet other guys after her own breakup. I hadn't realized, but she was even the one who introduced her to the man she later married. A marriage that lasted barely a year. My sweetheart later tried to get back together, but things had changed, and I felt bitterness that kept us apart. In reflecting, I realized that her mother may have waited until now to reveal this to me and my sister, perhaps to avoid disrupting our current marriages. Maybe she wanted to show me, and my sister, how her actions years ago had changed our lives. My former girlfriend told me, after we reconnected, that her mother hadn't approved of how things had ended. Even now, there are strange coincidences. My sister and my ex's phone numbers share the same last 4 digits, and both of them had children named Britt or Brittany. It felt like some connection had lingered, like we were tied together in ways beyond my understanding. Soon after this vision, my mother passed away. When we went to her house to tell her caregiver, the woman stopped us, saying, "I know." She explained that around 3 a.m., about 20 minutes after my mother's passing, she'd heard knocks on every door, as if my mother was saying goodbye. Not long after, in our new home, I experienced one last strange event. One morning, I woke up and heard a woman moaning in the bedroom. I was about to wake my wife, but then she sat up and asked, "Did you hear that?" It was the last time we heard anything like it, and I wondered if it was my mother's way of saying goodbye. My former high school sweetheart and I have gone our separate ways, happy to have reconnected, but we both sense that some things just don't end. These coincidences and encounters have convinced me that perhaps love and connections linger in ways we may never fully understand. To give you some background on us, we're both over 40, well past the age of being easily tricked or spooked by stories. My husband is retired from a government job, and I work as a medical transcriptionist. We like to think we have good heads on our shoulders. But he once shared an eerie experience that stuck with him ever since. He was around 17 at the time, back in November of 1976, during deer hunting season. He and 2 friends, Jerry and Brian, decided to stay overnight at Jerry's dad's hunting camp in southwest Louisiana, a remote area known as Old River. They arrived around 6 or 6:30 in the evening. The camp was just a simple one-room shack with one door, nothing fancy. The plan was to head out hunting early in the morning, so they weren't drinking or doing anything that would impair them. They were just sitting around, killing time and talking. Around 9 p.m., they decided to go out and do a little headlight hunting, or spotlighting. They each had a gun. My husband had a .30-30, Brian had a .308, and Jerry had a .45 pistol, and headlamps with 6-volt batteries, bright enough for hunting since animal eyes reflect light so distinctly in the dark. They'd been walking about 30 to 45 minutes when they came across an old track, like a path that might have been a road at one time. As they followed it a short way, they entered a clearing surrounded by trees. They'd stumbled upon an old graveyard. It wasn't very large, probably around 100 to 150 tombstones in total, but at the far side of the graveyard, about 50 yards away, they saw a tall monument, maybe 7 or 8 feet high, which looked like a statue shaped vaguely like a man. Being teenagers and a little bored, Jerry decided to egg Brian on, saying, "I bet you can't shoot that statue over there." Brian raised his gun, aimed, and fired. Nothing happened. Then Jerry challenged my husband, Peter, to try. Peter didn't really want to shoot anything in a graveyard, but he aimed high and fired just to go along with it. Again, nothing happened. Finally, Jerry lifted his .45 and shot directly at the statue. The instant he fired, they all heard an unearthly scream that echoed through the trees. They were paralyzed with fear. My husband glanced at Jerry and saw that he'd fainted, collapsing right there on the spot. He and Brian grabbed Jerry by the arms and dragged him all the way back to the camp as fast as they could manage. When they got inside, they practically threw him onto one of the cots and locked the door. Still shaken, They talked about what they'd heard, trying to make sense of it. One of them noticed Jerry was still gripping his pistol, and they had to pry his fingers off the handle. None of them slept that night. They kept their guns close, too afraid to close their eyes. The next morning, once the sun was up and the terror of the night had faded a little, Peter and Jerry unloaded their dirt bikes. Brian rode with Jerry, and they decided to return to the cemetery to see what had really happened. In the daylight, feeling a bit braver, they retraced their steps. But when they reached the graveyard, there was no statue. In fact, there wasn't a single tombstone over 2 or 3 feet tall. My husband was completely freaked out. He turned his bike around, rode straight back to camp, loaded it onto his truck, and left. He's never gone back and says he never will. The memory still chills him to this day. We still wonder what that statue was. Could it have been some kind of guardian spirit? Or maybe an apparition warning them not to disturb the area? He lost contact with his friends over the years, and they never talked about it after that night. Probably because, as teenage boys, they didn't want to admit just how scared they were. Whatever it was, it certainly sent a clear message that night. Don't come back. And they never did. I married my husband in October of 2007. Not long after that, probably around February of 2008, we decided to remodel our home. He'd bought the house in 1979, when he was about 25, from an older couple who were moving out of state to be near their children. The house had largely stayed the same, with just a few changes over the years, like some painting and wallpapering done by his ex-wife. The only major renovation he'd done before our marriage was knocking out a wall on the south side of the house to add a music room. With our kids grown and just the 2 of us living there, we decided to take out an extra bedroom and turn the house into an open floor plan. We removed the bedroom walls, enlarged the kitchen, and replaced a window with French doors along the west wall. The place felt airy, light, and much more spacious. Since my husband and brother were doing the work themselves on weekends, it took several months to complete the project. Before we started the renovations, I'd never felt anything out of place in the house. Occasionally, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I'd heard or sensed something, but it was always faint, and I never felt afraid. One of the first things we did was knock out the walls of the extra bedroom. It completely transformed the space, and I could already see how much bigger and brighter the house was going to feel. That night, we fell asleep quickly, but something woke me up around 2 a.m. I assumed my husband had bumped me, but he was sound asleep on his side of the bed. I got up to use the bathroom, and as I stepped into the hallway, I saw a shadow moving in what used to be the extra bedroom. At first, I thought I was imagining things since I'd just woken up, but as I stood at the door, I saw the shadow pacing back and forth as if confused. It would walk toward where the wall used to be, stop, turn, and then walk back. I felt a strong sense of confusion and anxiety coming from it, but oddly, I wasn't afraid. Just as I considered waking my husband, the shadow faded away. I went back to bed without even using the bathroom, deciding not to mention it to him. I'm sensitive to moods and atmospheres, but I try not to talk about it too much. In the days that followed, I often felt like something or someone was watching me when I was alone in the house. It was a bit unsettling, but not terrifying. Meanwhile, my husband and brother kept misplacing tools, and the electrical tools would sometimes stop working for no reason. They'd reset the breakers and try again, and then everything would work fine. Since the house was older, they rewired everything, and that seemed to solve the electrical issues, though they continued to lose track of things constantly. One evening, I was cooking in the old kitchen, and I felt a presence suddenly come up behind me. It was ice cold, and chills ran all over me. I wasn't scared, but I could feel I wasn't alone. I turned around and, feeling brave, said, "What do you want?" I didn't hear any response, but I sensed that whoever or whatever it was felt confused, like it wanted to ask me something. Eventually, the feeling faded, and I was alone again. There were other moments like this while we worked on the house, but one that really stands out happened while my husband and brother were installing a new attic door. My husband was up in the attic by himself when he suddenly called down, "What?" My brother and I looked at each other, confused, and asked him who he was talking to. He replied, "One of you asked me, 'Why are you doing this?' We assured him we hadn't said anything like that. Visibly rattled, he hurried through the rest of the work and came down as quickly as he could. To this day, he refuses to go back up into the attic. Though he insists he's never felt anything unusual in the house before or since, I still feel the presence occasionally when I'm alone. I've tried talking to it, saying we're sorry if we disturbed anything and that we won't make any more changes, but it still seems to return from time to time. I am the first owner of my residence. My house was built in 2006, after Hurricane Katrina destroyed my previous home. The land was once woods and had never had any structure on it before. This August marks 7 years of living here, but for 6 of those years, I've experienced paranormal activity that seems to be gradually increasing. I should mention that I've encountered unexplained things in every residence I've lived in, and some very negative experiences in my childhood have left me wary of the paranormal. The activity started in my master bedroom and has since spread throughout the house. In my bedroom, I've heard my name called, seen shadows pass over the window, momentarily blocking out the light, and once I even saw an orb, an electric blue light about the size of a baseball or softball. When it noticed me looking at it, it ran into the wall of my closet, and I haven't seen it since. I've also felt the weight of something sitting down on the edge of my bed, with a visible imprint left in the mattress. In the kitchen, I once saw a glass move 2 inches across the counter. Later that day, as I was getting something from the refrigerator, I heard a knocking on the freezer door right in front of my face. I watched for a second, then told it to stop, and it did. In the living room, I've heard voices, including one that said, "She's back," when I returned from work one day, and I've heard popping noises in the middle of the room. I checked all the electrical outlets and appliances, but found no reason for the sounds. Hearing "she's back" made me suspect there was more than one entity in the house. Lately, the hallway has become a focal point of the activity. I often hear footsteps, loud, purposeful steps, like someone walking through my house in heavy boots. My cat notices the sound too, always turning to look toward the hallway. The footsteps usually stop at the doorway of whatever room I'm in, as though someone is standing there watching, but I see nothing. The last time this happened was 2 weeks ago. I heard the familiar footsteps coming down the hall, stopping just outside the guest room where I was. Then something spoke my name. I gathered my courage and asked, "Who's there?" I didn't expect a response, since I'd asked before with no reply, but this time I heard a male voice answer, "Me." I didn't recognize the voice and had no idea who me could be. Feeling unnerved, I left it at that and asked no further questions. Though these experiences scare me, I don't feel that whatever is in my space is trying to harm me. I've never been touched inappropriately or physically pushed. The only negative experience happened in my office during the 2nd year of activity, when I heard a breathy, forceful voice say, "Get out," right in my ear. I left the house that day, shaken, but then my fear turned to anger. I drove back, went into the office, and told the air exactly what I thought. Since then, I haven't had any more encounters like that. I know how all this sounds, but I've accepted that I'm not imagining things. Something is happening around me. I once sought help from a person who claimed to be a psychic/medium, but they told me they couldn't help without explanation. So here I am, learning to live with it, even as the mysteries in my own home continue to unfold. My daddy's death and the hooded figure. In 1990, when I was 17, I was living in a trailer. My parents were divorced and I was in my room, where I'd usually watch TV and do my homework. It was evening, just after supper, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I felt a light tapping on my right shoulder, but when I looked over, I saw nothing, just my bed and the window. A moment later, my mom called me, and when I turned to my left, I noticed her face was red, as though she'd been crying. I followed her into the living room, where my uncle was sitting. She looked at me and gave me the news that my dad had passed away from a heart attack. Shocked and angry, I got up and cried, devastated that he was gone so suddenly, especially since he was so young. Then, a year later, when I was 18, I moved into my own trailer next to my mom's. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I saw a dark figure by my window. It wore a hooded robe, and though it didn't approach me, its presence gave me chills. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to shake the fear until I eventually fell asleep. I tried telling my mom about it, but like many parents, she dismissed it. Over time, I've learned to accept these experiences, even if they still unsettle me. Pawpaw, is that you? On the night of September 7th, 2004, I was 30 years old, and I'd just gone to bed. I don't know if it was a dream or a visitation, but I saw my pawpaw, my mother's father. He was strict but a good man, a strong Christian, and a devoted husband and father. We talked, though I can't remember all the details now. The next morning, my mom woke me up in tears, telling me Pawpaw had passed. I didn't cry at first. Deep down, I already knew. We prepared to travel to my mom's hometown for the funeral. Seeing him in the casket, looking so peaceful, was a hard reality. He died in his sleep that morning, my mama had told me, simply never waking up. It felt like he'd come to me in those last moments to say goodbye. Then, in 2009, after we moved to a new house, I was about to nap when I smelled tobacco, a scent I recognized from childhood. Neither my family nor I used tobacco, but my pawpaw did, along with my uncle who doesn't live with us. I took it as a sign that my pawpaw had visited the new house, just as my daddy had. Was that my step-uncle? This October, I believe I saw my stepfather's late brother. It was around 11 a.m., and my mom, stepdad, and I were heading out for lunch. As I stepped outside toward the car, I noticed a thin man with white hair sitting in an old chair my stepfather had recently brought home. The man looked just like my step-uncle. I'm still not sure why he decided to appear to me. Was it a good sign or a warning? I'd love to hear what others think. On Halloween, I took some photos in between trick-or-treaters. Later, I noticed a white streak on the camera, shaped like a figure. A friend thought it could be an angel or perhaps a ghost. I wish I could share the picture here to see what others might say about it. My aunt's experience. In sharing my stories, my mother told me one about my aunt, who lives in an old house in New Orleans. One night, as my aunt was going to bed, she noticed the shadow of a little boy, looking lost and confused. She wasn't afraid of him. She felt that he was just seeking attention, so she let him be. She believes he died in the house. My aunt is comfortable with the little boy's spirit and feels compassion for him. My mom finally came around to believing in ghosts after seeing a photo from Myrtle's plantation, which sparked conversations between us. She's no longer afraid to discuss these things, and we even enjoyed sharing our experiences, including my aunt's story, together. The Myrtle's plantation. In May 2009, as a gift after I'd been in the hospital, my mom took me to visit the Myrtle's plantation. The place was beautiful and full of history. When we arrived, I thought I saw the shape of a person out of the corner of my eye, but when I looked back, no one was there. We went on a tour that started around 10 a.m., and I took pictures both inside and outside. Inside, I noticed a faint handprint on one of the mirrors, which the tour guide pointed out, saying there was a face in the mirror as well. It gave me chills, but nothing strange happened until I was seated on my walker, and I felt a tug on the footrest. I jumped up, startled, but didn't say anything since my mom still didn't fully believe in ghosts. Later, when I developed the photos, I noticed something unusual. In one of the pictures, I saw what appeared to be a figure dressed in old clothing, with a head wrap, sitting inside the house. My mom, my ex-boyfriend, and even my stepfather saw it too. This was the first clear image I'd ever captured of a ghost since my encounter with the hooded figure so many years before. These experiences, from my father's passing and the hooded figure to my visits from family members long gone, have shaped my view of the spirit world. I'm no longer skeptical. Instead, I find myself open and even comforted by these encounters, even if I don't always understand why they happen. Most of my experiences with the paranormal have taken place in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, but my story actually begins back in my childhood in Mexico. For as long as I can remember, I've always felt a bit different from everyone else. I don't recall much from those early years, but my mother often shares stories about how creative I was as a little girl. She says I would spend hours talking to myself, having full conversations with what she assumed were imaginary friends. At first, She thought I was just lonely or that my imagination was running wild. After all, it's common for 6-year-olds to have imaginary friends, so she didn't give it much thought. But one day, I asked her if she'd like to meet my friends. When she asked where they were, I pointed to the space beside me, smiling brightly. She tried to explain that they were only in my head, gently encouraging me to spend more time with other kids my age. I cried, insisting that they were real and that they were right there. After some time, she decided that a change of scenery might help, so she filed for visas, and 2 years later we moved to the United States. We arrived in Louisiana in the year 2000, and I was 8 years old. Adjusting to this new life was challenging. My mother worked long hours, so I rarely saw her, and although we lived with my cousin Angel, who was my age, I spent most of my time alone since we didn't get along well. In the beginning, my life was pretty ordinary. I'd watch TV, do homework, and play with my dolls. Normal things for an 8-year-old. Nothing strange happened. My imaginary friends had faded, and despite seeing my mom infrequently, I was happy. Every Friday night, I'd stay up late waiting for my mom to get home. But one specific Friday stands out in my memory. I was watching cartoons and eating popcorn when I heard a noise in the hallway. I looked over but didn't see anything, so I went back to my show. A few minutes later, I heard it again and turned around to see a small shadow. At first, I was scared, but curiosity got the best of me. I got up to investigate and found my porcelain doll lying in the hallway, even though I hadn't played with her that day. Assuming Angel was trying to scare me, I put the doll back in my room and shrugged it off. But after that, I started hearing the noise every Friday, and soon it was happening on other days too. I began feeling uneasy. Sometimes I'd hear doors creak and wonder if I was imagining things. I eventually stopped playing with my dolls, feeling like they were watching me. At night, I'd cover them with a blanket because I was so creeped out. My mom noticed and asked why I was covering my dolls, so I told her everything. But she didn't believe me and said I was imagining things, banning me from watching horror movies since I'd always been a huge fan. I begged her to take me to church each week, so she arranged for a cousin to take me, and over time, things returned to normal. For a few years, everything stayed quiet until I was 14. My brother, who was 23 at the time, finally got his visa and came to live with us. My mom rented a 2-bedroom apartment, and it was just the 3 of us. One day, my brother and I were at Walmart, looking for a chess set, when we stumbled across a Ouija board in the game aisle. Intrigued, we bought it, and once we got home, our cousins joined in, eager to play. But instead of taking it seriously, they just moved the pointer themselves. I watched them, curious, and later took the board to my room for a session by myself. I didn't believe in supernatural things, but I was curious, so I started a session, asking if anyone wanted to talk to me. At first, the pointer didn't move, but after a few minutes, it slid over to yes. Shocked, I asked a few more questions, and it responded, giving answers that years later would actually come true. Fascinated, I researched how to use the board properly. I learned protection prayers and the importance of never asking a spirit to move anything in your home, which would allow it to roam freely. Armed with these precautions, I continued with the board over the next few months. But one night in 2006, everything changed. After finishing my chores, I decided to do a session. This time, when I asked if anyone wanted to talk, the pointer spelled DIE. At first, I thought of the Spanish name Diego, but then it hit me. It was telling me to die. Panicked, I moved the pointer to goodbye, flipped the board over, and put it away in my closet. Over the next few months, strange things started happening again. I heard doors creak and odd noises. I tried to dismiss it as the air conditioning, but it kept getting worse. I even started shutting every door, especially the closet, before going to bed. I eventually avoided my room altogether, only going in to sleep or use the bathroom. One day, while mopping the living room, the microwave suddenly turned on. I turned it off, but a few minutes later, it started spinning again, even though it was unplugged. Frightened, I ran to my cousin's place and waited for my mom to come home. For the next year, strange occurrences continued, but I ignored them as best I could. In January 2008, we moved to a new apartment, and I was thrilled to leave the Ouija board behind. But one day, While unpacking, my mom casually mentioned that she had thrown it away. Relieved, I thought the worst was over. But at the end of 2008, strange things resumed. One night, while watching TV late, I felt something grip my ankle tightly. Paralyzed with terror, I screamed and bolted for my mom's room. In a state of shock, I told her what had happened, and she prayed over me until I calmed down. I was so shaken that I could barely sleep for weeks, dreading being alone. By 2011, I was living with my boyfriend, Gene, but I still felt a constant eerie presence. I developed insomnia, feeling as if something was watching me even in the dark. When Gene started working night shifts, my fear escalated. I kept every light on and locked myself in the bedroom each night. Then, in December 2011, things took a darker turn. My aunt was visiting, and as I decorated an altar for the Virgin Mary, one of the candles fell from the table. It didn't make sense, as all the doors and windows were closed. 2 weeks later, while closing up after my mom's birthday party, I saw a shadow pass from her room to the kitchen. I asked if anyone was up, but no one was. By January 2012, strange noises and shadows continued to torment me. One night, while playing chess on my laptop, I heard the blender whirring in the kitchen, even though it was unplugged. Horrified, I ran outside and called Jean. I tried explaining it to my mom, but she suggested I pray and start attending church again. Around this time, my religious cousin visited and sensed something off, warning me that El Malo te quiere agarrar. The evil one wants to get a hold of you. I've heard many theories. Some say I have a gift, others blame the Ouija board or tarot cards. But no matter where I go, the experiences follow me. Even now, I hear strange noises, feel watched, and struggle with sleepless nights. I don't know what to do or where to turn for help. This experience happened while my husband and I were in New Orleans, right after his Aunt Rita had passed away during a vacation in St. Lucia. Due to customs issues with transporting her body, Aunt Rita remained in St. Lucia for 3 to 4 weeks before being returned home. My husband and I decided to stay at her house for a week to ensure everything was in order. Aunt Rita lived in the 9th Ward, an area still marked by the aftermath of Hurricanes Rita and Katrina. We brought along our 2 children and close family friends, who had their 2 boys and a little cocker spaniel named Cocky with them. Almost immediately, the kids began complaining that Cocky was barking at random corners in the house, seeming agitated. We assumed it was just the dog's reaction to being in an unfamiliar place. Due to hurricane repairs, most of the house was still under construction, with rooms packed full of stored items and few available for sleeping. The children set up in the front room, while our friends took the back bedroom, leaving Aunt Rita's room for us. But my husband was reluctant. He felt uneasy and thought it might be disrespectful to sleep in her bed. After a long debate, and given we had just driven over 9 hours and stayed up late, he finally agreed. I had already put our things in her room, so we turned in for the night. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I was jolted awake by what felt like a loud slap against the bed, as if someone had struck it hard with an open hand. Right after, I heard a man's voice shout, "Aunt's in the bed!" Half asleep, I looked around, noticing a figure at the foot of the bed, a shape like static from a TV screen, vaguely shaped like a man. In that groggy moment, I thought, "You have got to be kidding me. Did a ghost just wake me up?" Too exhausted to react, I closed my eyes, hoping to fall back asleep. But within seconds, I felt a firm grip around my neck, tightening slowly. I could feel my face getting hot, and breathing became difficult. Alarmed, I began reciting the Lord's Prayer, and as I did, the pressure around my neck eased. I continued praying, and the grip released me. I thought to myself, "You don't know who you're messing with. You know who my father is. You better run." But about a minute later, the presence returned, hands around my neck again, this time applying less pressure, almost hesitantly. I said firmly, "Jesus is Lord," and immediately, the ghost let go, leaving the room entirely. In the morning, I told my husband and our friends about the encounter. They speculated that maybe the spirit didn't want us sleeping in Aunt Rita's bed. My husband even suggested it could have been Aunt Rita herself, but I was sure it wasn't. It felt like the presence of an angry man. It made me think that perhaps this ghost was the reason Kaki had been so upset whenever the adults weren't around. This spirit, who I called Ants in the Bed, wasn't finished. During a family dinner held after Aunt Rita's service, everyone in the house heard the loud slam and lock of Aunt Rita's bedroom door, though no one was near it. My husband's father, who is a minister, went to the back to investigate and found he couldn't open the door, though it had never been an issue before. When I told him about my experience, he asked a lot of questions, clearly unsettled. Eventually, we all returned to the front to finish dinner, but my father-in-law lingered in the back a little longer. After dinner, we noticed that the bedroom door was unlocked and open. To this day, I wonder what my father-in-law might have said to the ghost to get it to unlock the door. In my family, only a few of us experience this strange phenomenon, where the smell of roses or lilacs seems to act as a warning of something serious. When I was younger, one of my aunts and her husband drove an 18-wheeler across the country. She had been dealing with health issues, so on a break from work, she scheduled a doctor's appointment. Right after setting it, she received a call from their dispatcher with a job offer for her and her husband. Since it was a short run, she told my uncle to go without her and promised to meet him the next day at the shop. But that next morning, on her way to meet him, she never made it there. Just a few hours after my aunt had left, my grandma started noticing the scent of roses filling her home. Thinking one of us kids had gotten into her perfume, she went around smelling each of us. But none of us had been near her perfume, and it was too cold outside for any roses to be in bloom. After nearly an hour of searching, she heard a knock on the door. It was 2 state troopers who brought tragic news. My aunt had blacked out while driving, veering into the other lane, and hit a pickup truck head-on. My grandma went with them to identify her body, and after that, the smell of roses faded. This scent of roses has appeared at other times in our family, experienced by my mom, aunt, sister, and myself. In 2004, my mom, sister, and I were sitting around, reminiscing about old times, when out of nowhere, the room filled with the fragrance of roses. The place we lived had no rose bushes, only trees with moss hanging from them. We walked through the apartment and even went outside, but the smell was only present in the living room. Hours later, my brother called to tell us that our dad was in the hospital and wasn't expected to survive the night. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I suddenly smelled lilacs. Once again, I searched the house, but found no source of the scent. About 30 minutes later, my brother called to let us know our dad had passed away early that morning. One of the more recent experiences happened on October 5th, nearly a year ago. I was sitting in the computer room when I started smelling roses again. There was no perfume or air freshener in the house, but I walked through all the rooms and even stepped outside to see if the smell might be coming from somewhere else. But the roses were only in the computer room. I called my mom and aunt to see if they'd heard from anyone in the family, wondering if someone was sick or had passed, but they hadn't talked to anyone recently. All morning, the smell lingered, and I couldn't figure out why. Later that afternoon, I received a call from my son's school, saying he was very sick and needed to be picked up. I brought him home and spent the day taking care of him and doing chores, still noticing the scent of roses now and then. That evening, my boyfriend and I decided it was best to take him to the emergency room. Once there, the doctor took one look at my son and asked if he was diabetic. Surprised, I said no, but after running some tests, they confirmed he was diabetic. He spent a week in the hospital, followed by another week at home under doctor's care. After we brought him home, my aunt and I began smelling lilacs whenever we passed his room. We've become accustomed to this unusual sign, the smell of roses as a warning that something serious is about to happen, or lilacs when something concerning has already happened. It never fails to amaze us each time, and these are just a few of the many instances we've experienced over the years. My grandma lived in an old 2-story house in Oklahoma, and my sister's cousin and I practically grew up there. The upstairs rooms always had an eerie feeling for the 4 of us. We rarely wanted to go up there, as it felt like someone was always hiding and watching whenever we ventured upstairs. There was a story about a woman who had lived in the house before our grandma. People said she seemed perpetually sad and kept to herself. One night, she was seen walking down the road toward the train tracks, where she stood on the rails and was struck by a train. Rumor had it that her spirit lingered in the house, and that every night at 10 p.m., you could hear a woman's scream echoing through the place. Our grandma dismissed it, telling us it was just a made-up story to keep kids in the neighborhood away from the tracks. She insisted that if we ever heard anything strange or felt someone watching, it was just our imagination. So, the story faded and we never really talked about it again, especially not with adults. When I was a senior in high school, my grandma passed away. Shortly after graduation, I got married, and my husband and I began looking for a place to live. At the time, his sister was living in my grandma's old house and suggested we talk to the owner, as she was planning to move soon. We reached an agreement with the landlord to take over the rent once she moved out, and a few months later my husband and I moved in. Initially, everything seemed fine. I had a job working at a nursing home, and one day I learned from a nurse who lived next door that my grandma had actually passed away in that very nursing home. She shared how rough things had gotten for my grandma toward the end of her life, which was difficult to hear. A few months after moving in, I hurt my back while lifting a patient. I called in sick that night and went to bed early, hoping to ease the pain. I lay on my side, facing my husband, struggling to fall asleep as the pain kept me tossing and turning. After about 30 minutes, I felt as though someone had sat down on the side of the bed. I stayed still, not turning to look. Then, I felt a warm hand on the lower part of my back, and it felt like a heat pack was soothing the pain. The warmth lingered for a few moments, and then, just like that, the pain was gone. After a moment, I sensed the presence lift off the bed. Curious, I looked over my shoulder and saw a shadow moving slowly up the stairs. I've lived in the same trailer for the past 10 years, moving it to different areas around Louisiana. The first 5 years went by without any major issues. Sometimes I'd hear a doorknob jiggling or someone calling my name, but I usually shrugged it off as my imagination. When I went to check, no one was ever there. By the end of the 5th year, we had enough money to move, and we bought a property from a friend to relocate. I don't have much background on the trailer itself or the land we live on now. My boyfriend found the trailer abandoned just a block away from where we are now. It had been left empty, and people in the neighborhood had vandalized it. He decided to fix it up, pulling it out of the weeds and renovating it. Recently, one of my neighbors mentioned that this subdivision, or as I'd rather call it, trailer park, used to be a plantation. The couple who lived here passed away, and their children turned the land into a subdivision, eventually selling off plots for trailers. That's all the history I have on the land and trailer so far. Since moving here, strange things have happened regularly. At first, I heard the same jiggling of doorknobs I'd noticed before. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination, but after hearing it night after night, I became curious. One night, I grabbed my boyfriend's handgun, walked around, and opened each door. My boyfriend was out of town working, so it was just me and my 2 boys. After checking every door and finding nothing unusual, I walked around the trailer. There was no one there. This continued for a few months, then stopped just as suddenly. A couple of weeks later, after the doorknob sounds stopped, I was on the computer late one night after my boys had gone to bed. I was in a chat room talking to friends when, out of nowhere, a nickel dropped onto the desk. I looked around trying to figure out where it came from, but the door was closed, and no one else was around. I laughed and said, "Thank you, I needed that," and went back to what I was doing. A few days later, I was sitting on the couch watching TV, waiting for the boys to get home from school. Suddenly, I felt someone pull my hair. I turned around, thinking one of the boys was playing a joke, but no one was there. The most recent incident happened a couple of weeks ago. We had planned a trip to the water park, using our season passes for one last visit before they closed for the summer. But I wasn't feeling well, so we decided not to go. I'd put my shoes under the coffee table, with my purse and a bag I used to carry my son's insulin sitting on the side of the couch. After running my son's bath and setting him up, I went into the kitchen to prep lunches for the next day. When I returned to the living room, I found my shoes on top of the coffee table and my purse and bag sitting on the couch, as if someone had laid everything out. My son was in the bath, and my boyfriend was still on the computer, so I know neither of them moved anything. I shook my head and said, "Sorry, but no one's going anywhere," and put everything back where I'd left it. I don't know what's causing these things, but they've become a part of our life here, and I've learned to just go with it. Oh. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Oh. Since moving into a historic house in the Lower Garden District of New Orleans, I've had experiences that have left me baffled and exhausted. The house, built in 1895, looks like something right out of an Anne Rice novel, with wrought iron accents and 2 large galleries lined with tall windows. The place has since been converted into 15 individual apartments, and I'm living in what was once a double parlor on the bottom left side. I moved in 2 weeks ago, and everything seemed fine until my little sister visited and told me she felt a presence in my bathroom. She's always been sensitive to these things, so I believed her and mentally prepared for some possible activity. But what unfolded in the following days went far beyond anything I expected. On my second night, around 3 a.m., often called the devil's hour, I was startled awake by the heavy, leaden sound of footsteps shuffling down the hallway outside my door. I listened intently as the steps approached my door and stopped there, without retreating or going up the stairs. Terrified, I peeked under the door but saw nothing. Trying to shake it off, I lay back down, but I felt lightheaded and sensed something touching me, making the hair on my arms stand on end. That night, I barely slept. A few nights later, a friend came to visit for the weekend. The first night she was there, I dreamt of a faint yellowish figure standing by my bed. I awoke from the dream to hear distinct footsteps in my bedroom, only to wake up again to the real sound of footsteps in the same spot. I was somehow able to drift back to sleep, but the unease was overwhelming. The next night, however, things became even stranger. My friend, an insomniac, was up late on my computer. According to her, I'd fallen asleep around 1:30 a.m. and began snoring, only to get out of bed, walk out of the apartment and head outside. She saw me out of the corner of her eye but assumed I was stepping out for something. After I didn't return for several minutes, she opened the window to look for me, and saw me standing completely naked, staring at the front of the house. She immediately ran outside to find me just standing there, focused on the double veranda. When she approached, I asked, "What is this? Why don't I have access to this?" I was motioning toward the veranda, which I later learned was part of a post-Katrina renovation. At a loss, my friend guided me back inside, collecting my clothes along the way. Once we were back in the apartment, I walked straight to the bathroom and stayed in there in complete silence for half an hour. When I came out, I went directly to my dresser and began going through each item as though inspecting it for the first time. Then, out of nowhere, I started berating her. She was shocked. I'm never unkind to my friends. She tried to ask if she'd done something wrong, but I brushed her off, telling her that not everything is about you, and that I knew the big picture. I even demanded she keep this incident a secret and not mention it to me or anyone else. After this strange outburst, I collapsed on the bed and went back to sleep, snoring. The next day, my friend brought it up, visibly shaken. I have no memory of any of it, and I've never been known to sleepwalk, let alone sleepwalk outside. Naturally, my thoughts turned to the possibility of possession, but I was reluctant to jump to conclusions. Since then, I've seen orbs in the apartment, smelled a strong perfume in my bathroom, despite no vents and me not wearing any scents, and noticed my cats wailing at dark rooms. I haven't slept soundly in over a week, and it's taken a toll on me. Just last night, I tried acknowledging whatever was in the house, even offering it a small libation, which seemed to ease the energy in the room. But sure enough, at 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by noises in the hallway, followed by that same lightheaded feeling and the sensation of something brushing against me. I heard a knocking on my window, but after looking outside, I could find no source. I'm at my wit's end, craving rest, and anxious not to repeat the experience of sleepwalking outside. I love this house, but I need peace. The first time I saw the hooded figure, I was driving late at night near Annapolis, VA. At the time, I dismissed it as a hallucination from sleep deprivation and stress. I was wrong. For 2 years, nothing happened. As time went on, I convinced myself that I had just imagined it. Then, the sightings started again, suddenly and without warning. The first time I saw it again, I was at home in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It was around 12:15 a.m., and I woke up screaming from a nightmare. My wife was shaking me, trying to wake me up. I couldn't remember the dream, but she said I had been yelling for minutes before I woke. Apologizing, I got up, drank some water, then returned to bed. My wife had already fallen back asleep. I tried to settle down, but then I got that same feeling I'd experienced in Virginia. Every hair on my neck stood up. Goosebumps prickled my skin as a shiver ran through me. I kept my eyes shut, but the feeling didn't go away. When I finally opened my eyes, I scanned the ceiling and the room, and then I saw it. In the corner, a shadowy figure stood motionless. It was slight in build, with a tall, feminine shape, wearing what looked like a porcelain mask, shiny and white, with no eyes or perhaps all black eyes. I sat up, staring at it, wondering if I was dreaming. The goosebumps didn't fade. My heart raced as it started moving toward me, stepping from the shadows into the moonlight from the window. Panicked, I threw a pillow at it, yelling, "What the F asterisk 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 is that? What the F asterisk 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 is that?" I was hoping to wake my wife so she'd see it too. She woke up, confused, and as she turned on the light, the figure vanished. I searched the room, checked my son's room, and secured the locks, but there was nothing. Later, my wife admitted she might have seen something, though over time, she started doubting herself. I knew exactly what I'd seen. A slender, feminine figure with a porcelain mask, black eyes, and long, straight black hair. The encounter shook me. A few days later, I saw it again, this time outside. My house was a large square with a courtyard in the center, with glass walls in many of the rooms facing the courtyard. Late one night, I felt that same sensation and looked out my bedroom window. There it was, standing outside, looking in. Grabbing a bat, I ran outside to confront it, but it was gone by the time I reached the courtyard. My wife was starting to worry about my behavior. About a week later, I woke up to see it sitting in a chair in the corner of my room, its hand reaching out toward me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It rose from the chair and walked slowly to my bedside, standing over me for what felt like 5 minutes. It leaned close to my face, revealing all black eyes with no whites, and then straightened up abruptly, as if startled. It turned and walked quickly toward the bathroom, and I found myself able to move again. I jumped up, yelling, "What do you want?" But there was no one there. My wife was now looking at me as if I were losing my mind, and she even suggested I see a psychiatrist. I refused. For a while, things went quiet. Then one night, I saw it again at the door of my room. It turned and walked away, and I panicked, fearing it would hurt my son. I rushed to his room, found him safe, and brought him back to bed with me. My wife was upset, but when I told her everything, starting with my experience in Virginia, she listened, though she looked deeply worried. The whole thing was putting a strain on our marriage, and I started questioning my sanity. Months passed without incident, and I thought it might be over. Then it got physical. One night, I woke up with goosebumps and the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept my eyes closed, praying that the sensation would pass. I backed up toward my wife, hoping her presence might help me calm down, and I began to relax as the goosebumps faded. Eventually, I opened my eyes, and there it was, kneeling at the edge of the bed, reaching for me. I panicked, trying to back away, but it grabbed my forearms. I screamed, pushing away as hard as I could, knocking my wife out of the bed in the process. The figure finally let go, and I fell off the bed next to her. My wife was furious, but then she noticed scratches on both my arms. Seeing those marks, she broke down in tears. I was furious. The next day, I went to my church and showed my priest the scratches, but he didn't seem to believe me. Still, I felt comforted being there. My wife and I started praying the rosary together every day and attending Mass as often as possible. We even had the priest bless the house. Things calmed down, and for a while we had peace. Then one night I couldn't sleep. I read for a while, watched some TV, and eventually turned off the lights around 1:20 a.m. At some point, I felt something on my leg. Assuming it was my wife's leg, I ignored it, but then I felt it on my back, then my feet, and realized it wasn't her. I looked down and saw snakes. Snakes everywhere. Jumping out of bed, I screamed, "There's snakes in the bed! There's snakes in the bed!" My wife woke up equally startled. I looked over, and the figure was standing in the corner, pointing at the bed and then at me. The snakes were still moving under the covers, occasionally spilling onto the floor. Furious, I charged at it, but by the time I hit the wall, it had vanished. My wife, having turned on the lamp, looked at the bed where the covers had seemed to writhe around. She pulled them off, but there was nothing there. We searched the entire house but found no snakes. In the aftermath, I had a sprained wrist, a mild concussion, and a snake bite on my ankle, which the doctor confirmed was from a non-venomous snake. He suggested we call an exterminator. My wife didn't see the figure, but she did see the bed covers moving and felt something slithering. That was it. We decided to move out of the house and even out of the state. Since then, I've sought help from 2 reputable voodoo practitioners familiar with hoodoo incantations. Both initially agreed to help, but each stopped abruptly during their rituals, refunded my money, and refused to continue. One warned me that something old and dark was following me and advised me to avoid anything that might open contact with the other side. She couldn't help me any further and asked me to leave. I know this all sounds like a bad horror story, but it happened, and I don't know what to do. Now all I can do is wait, pray, and try not to let my guard down. I was born and raised in New Orleans, and Hurricane Katrina hit the summer after I graduated high school. This story takes place 2 Christmas Eves later, outside the upscale lakefront condo where I lived at the time. Back then, the city was still empty enough that those of us who returned early could rent almost any place for next to nothing. For a while, I had been living on Magazine Street in a 2-bedroom apartment for just $200 a month, something that now rents for about 8 times that. I only moved to the lakefront condo because, unbelievably, it was even cheaper. My mom was still living in Baton Rouge, and my younger sister had wanted to spend Christmas with our extended family. So, she was staying with me for the night, and, despite being in her late teens, my mom wanted to surprise her with gifts in the morning. That's how I found myself driving all the way to Baton Rouge late on Christmas Eve. My car loaded with wrapped presents and my sister's dog, May, sitting next to me in the front seat, clearly eager for the adventure. For New Orleans, it was cold that night, with a light dusting of snow on the I-10. As a lifelong NOLA native, even a little snow on the road felt surreal. I finally got back to the condo around 3 a.m. and parked out front instead of in the garage to make it easier to unload the car. I called my girlfriend to check that my sister was asleep and to ask her to come down and take May while I snuck the presents inside. To save time, I clipped May's leash to her collar and we started toward the building entrance. That's when it happened. You have to understand, May is one of the friendliest dogs you'll ever meet. Her tail wags at the sight of anyone, always hopeful for attention. I had never heard her growl before, and it took me a second to realize the strange, low sound was coming from her. I was looking at the entrance when the growling started, so I glanced down, surprised to see her crouched so low that her belly nearly touched the ground. She was staring at the empty lot to the left of the condo complex, completely still, her eyes fixed on something just beyond the corner of the building. Following her gaze, I saw a woman standing there. She looked to be in her 30s with slightly curly blonde hair, barefoot, and wearing only a long white t-shirt that looked almost like a nightgown. She was crying, her shoulders shaking, her face streaked with tears. Under normal circumstances, if I saw someone like this, my instinct would be to help. But something about May's growl sent a chill up my spine. The moment I spotted the woman, alarm bells went off somewhere deep in my mind, and I froze. The woman saw me and, in that instant, we locked eyes. Then, she let out the most blood-curdling scream I'd ever heard. Something so raw, so piercing, it shook me to my core. If you've ever seen that viral Ring footage of a woman screaming in a car as it drove past, it sounded just like that. She raised her hand, pointing toward the lake behind me, her scream seeming to stretch on far longer than a human scream should. And then, just like that, she was gone. She didn't fade or disappear gradually. She was simply there one moment and gone the next. Her scream cut off suddenly, leaving only its echo in my ears. A week later, one of the maintenance guys mentioned something strange. Before Katrina, a homeless couple with 2 kids used to live in an old shed on that vacant lot beside the condo complex. They hadn't been seen since the hurricane and were presumed dead, like so many others. My description of the woman matched the mother from that family exactly. The blonde hair, the long t-shirt she wore as a dress. The events in this story took place in rural Acadia Parish, Louisiana, when I was 4 years old, and my brother was nearly 6. What we witnessed was no dream or trick of the mind. It was real and unlike anything from this world. My brother and I both saw a figure that we now call Light Man. This wasn't a shared experience. We each saw him separately through the bedroom window we shared, sometime in late summer, August or September of 1960. We don't know who saw him first or exactly how much time passed between our encounters, but we do know that we both saw him. First, my sighting. I was asleep in my bed, which was sideways against an open window with no screen. I woke up with my head resting against the windowsill. I'm not sure what woke me, but when I opened my eyes, I saw the stars above, and then, to the right of the window, I saw him. A man made of pure white light. He was standing just outside the window, and I felt terror grip me. I pulled back slightly and stared at him for several seconds. Frozen. His features were sharply defined. He had a slender face, a small nose, short hair, and average-sized eyes and ears. He wore a full suit, a shirt, tie, coat, and pants, all made of the same white light, yet somehow distinct from his body. Paralyzed with fear, I tried to scream for my mother, but nothing came out. Then, the light man started moving slowly to the left, crossing in front of my window. His head was tilted back slightly, his chin raised, and he looked straight ahead. His legs moved stiffly, almost as if marching, with his arms hanging down at his sides. As he passed the window, I leaned out to watch him, seeing him march towards the corner of the house, where he made a crisp left turn and vanished. Finally, I managed to scream for my mother. She came running, and I told her there was a man outside the window. Thinking I'd had a nightmare, she tried to reassure me, but I insisted it wasn't a dream. Growing concerned, she took my hand, grabbed a stick or rod from the kitchen, and led me outside to look around. We walked cautiously across the yard and around the corner of the house, but there was nothing there. Eventually, she relaxed, insisting it was just a dream, and took me back to my bed. I begged her to let me sleep with her, but she wouldn't. My younger brother was already in her bed. She closed the window and left, and I lay there, trembling until I finally fell asleep. My brother's sighting happened separately, though he doesn't remember exactly when. He too was asleep in our room, near a window with a screen. He woke up one night and saw the light man standing just outside, slightly to the left of his window. He watched as Light Man moved slowly across, head tilted back and chin raised, just as I'd seen. He didn't notice as much detail, but it was unmistakably the same figure, the same left-facing profile, and the same motion. Strangely, my brother felt no fear and eventually went back to sleep. We grew up without air conditioning, so we slept with the windows open. Our house was in a remote area, with the closest neighbor about half a mile away and no other houses for miles. We didn't talk about what we'd seen until more than 20 years later. My brother and I were out at a pizza place, and he casually mentioned an unusual experience from our childhood, something he'd never told anyone. As he described the glowing figure outside his window, my jaw dropped. I felt chills run down my spine. Before he could finish, I shared my own story. My wife and I exchanged stunned glances as we realized that we had each seen the same strange figure. For decades now, we've shared our story with friends and acquaintances, hoping to learn something about what we saw. But so far, we've found no answers. Now, both in our 60s, We would love to hear from anyone who might know something about these remarkable events or who may have experienced something similar. This story is exactly as it happened, with no embellishments. In the 1980s, I briefly lived in a ranch house on a 2-acre lot in Shreveport. I hadn't known when I moved in, but the house was part of a disputed estate after a tragic murder-suicide. A man had shot his wife before taking his own life. From the minute I moved in, the place gave me a bad feeling. In the first week, I decided to sit outside in the backyard on a glider swing. It was a beautiful October afternoon, but the backyard had been neglected. The pool was full of mud and sticks, the garden was overgrown, and the furniture was caked in dirt. As I sat there, I felt an intense sensation of being watched. I kept looking around, half expecting to see someone staring at me. Finally, the feeling was so strong that I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and left. I ended up keeping my keys with me at all times during my stay there, as that eerie feeling would often come over me. The house itself was strange, poorly remodeled over the years so that windows looked into other rooms and doors opened to blank walls. I kept to just a few rooms, the front rooms, my bedroom, bathroom, living room, and kitchen. Lights flickered, floors creaked, and whenever I was in the bath, I'd hear the faint sound of a man and woman arguing in the next room. Later, I found out that was where the murder-suicide had taken place. The entire atmosphere was unsettling. One day, my roommate came home, irritated, and asked if I'd been rummaging in the garage. I told her I hadn't even been in the garage and didn't know how to get in. Surprised, she explained that all my moving boxes had been pulled off the shelves and strewn across the floor. We worked different schedules, so we didn't see each other much, but before she even mentioned the garage, I'd already been wondering what was going on in that house. One night, I saw her car pull up around 3 a.m. after she'd come home from work. Just after she went to bed, I heard her scream. I was too scared to get up and check on her since I'd have to walk past the office, the room where the incident had occurred. I told myself I'd only go if she screamed again, but she didn't. The next morning, she asked if I'd heard her, and I played dumb. She was furious and explained that she'd rolled over to find a man with a terrible face bending over her. He vanished when she screamed. When I mentioned that I felt someone didn't want us there, she finally told me about the murder-suicide that had taken place in the office room. We tried to get more information from her mom, who'd known the family, but she was a fundamentalist Christian and got upset when we brought up ghosts. So we didn't discuss it much after that. Still, the lights flickered, the floors creaked, and the hallway to the office was always freezing cold, as was my bedroom. I ended up wearing gloves and a coat indoors because of the chill, which was strange since the rest of the house was warmer. Late one night, while alone in the house, I heard keys jangling in the front door, as if someone were trying to get in. My roommate's dog went nuts, barking and running to the door. I'd had enough by then, so I flung the door open, shouting, "Where are you?" But there was nothing. It was dead quiet. The driveway was in plain view and empty, and it was about 1/8 of a mile from the road, so I would have heard any car pulling up or footsteps in the yard. But there was nothing. I called the police, who told me to call the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office then told me to call the police, so it was probably a good thing there was no one there, no one living at least. After that, I applied for a job transfer and moved out after only 4 months. I don't think I slept more than 2 hours a night the entire time I lived there. There was one other strange occurrence I've never been able to explain. About a month after moving in, I noticed a small red light about the size of a pencil eraser on the wall across from my bed. It would appear around 9 p.m. and disappear with the first light of dawn. At first, I thought it was light reflecting from the road, but even after trying different things, adjusting the curtains, blocking the window, it didn't change. When I put my hand over it, the light vanished, but I saw no reflection on my hand or anything else nearby. After a while, it began to creep me out, so I just turned away whenever it appeared. I considered that it might be an orb, but it never moved, it just stayed in that one spot. My boyfriend, Rob, and I have always believed in the paranormal, and for the past year, we've shared a small 2-bedroom house in Louisiana. Rob had lived there a year before I moved in, so he's been there just over 2 years. When Rob first moved in, he had an Australian shepherd named Stetson. who was deaf. Almost every night, Rob would wake up to find Stetson barking, growling, and baring his teeth at the same corner of the living room. Since Stetson couldn't hear, he wasn't barking at a sound, which made it all the more unsettling. Stetson was usually a calm dog, so Rob was unnerved by his behavior. Each night, he'd carefully console him and then go back to bed. One day, Rob's neighbor casually asked if he knew what had happened in the house before he moved in. He didn't, so she filled him in. Apparently, a young man had lived there with his girlfriend, but one day he came home and found her with another man. Heartbroken, he put a gun to his head and took his own life. The neighbor claimed that she'd seen the scene herself and had even helped clean and repaint the room. She believed he'd been shot in the bathroom but somehow ended up in the second bedroom, where he passed away. Some even suspected the girlfriend, who had been questioned as a possible suspect, but the case remained unsolved. In January 2007, I moved in with Rob, and a few months later, in March, our friend Jeremy moved into the second bedroom, the very room where the man had died. The room always had an odd, earthy smell that no amount of cleaning or air freshening could eliminate. Not long after moving in, Jeremy mentioned feeling his bed shake from underneath, as if someone were punching it up from the floor. The bed sat low, so this was even more unsettling. When we told him the story of the young man, he wasn't thrilled. Since then, other strange things have happened. The closet door in the hallway, situated between the bathroom and Jeremy's room, the path the man would have walked, constantly opens and closes on its own. Heavy objects in the closet, like televisions, inexplicably fall to the floor. One time, a 6-foot bookshelf toppled over, shattering glass items we'd placed on it. Rob and I were both on the couch at the time, nowhere near it. In the middle of the night, Rob and I have each seen a man sitting on the couch, staring at the wall. When we look again, he's gone. Rob has even seen a shadow pass in front of our alarm clock, blocking the numbers for a moment. Small statues on our shelves have been mysteriously turned backward, and sometimes we catch glimpses of someone crossing in front of the bathroom door while we shower. We hear faint music, bangings, knocks, and thumps. The sense of being watched is constant, though no one is ever there. There's another spirit we've encountered as well. A tall, elderly man with silver hair, dressed in a black suit with a red tie. Sometimes he carries a matching black hat, but I've never seen him wear it. I was the first to see him one night while feeling unwell and sitting on the bathroom floor. There are no windows in there, so shadows don't cast naturally, but suddenly, I felt a chill and looked up. There he was, standing in the doorway, his arms folded across his chest, blocking the entry. He was incredibly tall, filling almost the entire door frame. Though I was startled, I didn't feel threatened. More like he just wanted me to know he was there. He disappeared after a few seconds. One night, I heard what sounded like a party from the 1920s or 30s, with faint swing music and voices. I got up, listened by each window, even opened the front and back doors, but every time I did, the noise would stop. The moment I put my head back on the pillow, the sounds would start again. I eventually fell asleep, feeling a bit psychotic. Rob and I have both seen this elderly man. The figure on the couch that we sometimes catch out of the corner of our eyes is him. Before I told Rob about seeing the man in the doorway, Rob had a dream of walking through an old house and seeing the same man pass by, pointing to burned-out outlines of crosses on the walls. That night, Rob even pointed to the wall in his sleep and spoke gibberish, which I laughed off at the time. When he shared the dream with me the next morning, I was stunned. He'd seen the same man. Later, we told the neighbor about the ghostly figure, and she mentioned that a friend of hers had once taken photos of an abandoned house across the street and had caught a silhouette of an old man in dark clothing with a hat. We've come to believe that he might be a former landowner, connected to the area long before these houses were built. He seems unaware of us, and his clothing style is from a different era. He never feels threatening, almost as if he simply wants to be acknowledged as an important figure, perhaps not realizing he's passed on. We've tried to research the history of both spirits, the young man who died in the house and the elderly man, but haven't had much luck. Soon we'll be moving out, and oddly it feels bittersweet. Our time with these spirits has been a strange, sometimes frightening, but unforgettable experience. We moved into a new house the summer before my freshman year of high school, and now I'm a freshman in college. Friends of ours moved into our old house, and before they moved out, they mentioned a few strange things that had happened there. Nothing scary, just unexplainable. It made me wonder if something had followed us or if we were just prone to attracting the supernatural. In this house, I believe we have the presence of a cowboy-like figure who walks from the side door, around the corner, and down the hall to my bedroom door where he just stands. We've seen him numerous times. When sitting on the couch, you might catch a glimpse of him walking by. He's never frightening, just a shadow passing by. It's as if he isn't always there, or only appears when something specific draws him in. I wonder if he's somehow connected to the past, replaying a routine that had meaning for him. There's also a young woman with long, wavy hair. She's tall and thin, and I've only seen her twice. Once, I was entering the house with my arms full of packages, turning off the alarm, and looked up to see her standing silently in the dining room. Another time, a family member saw or sensed her while inside, which was enough to convince my mom that our house is indeed haunted. But there's also a more unsettling presence, something that seems to inject fear. I always feel watched, constantly looking over my shoulder, unable to find peace in my own home. I used to enjoy being home alone, but now, at 18, I dread it. Strange occurrences often center around my room. For example, I'll turn off my closet light, settle into bed, switch off my bedside lamp, and then look up to see the closet light back on. It happens repeatedly, almost as if something is toying with me. Sometimes, I feel someone playing with my hair as I drift off to sleep, which oddly enough, I find calming. But other incidents aren't as peaceful. Once, while I was on my computer with my back to my large, 7-foot-high window, I heard a loud boom that shook my entire room. I immediately ran outside, but found nothing to explain it. No sign of anything that could have hit the window with such force. It was terrifying. One of the scariest incidents happened when the cross over my bedroom door went missing. I'm very particular about keeping a blessed cross there for protection, and it gives me peace of mind. But one day it was just gone, and none of us could find it. Then, the next day it was back, as if it had never moved. We've also had ongoing disturbances in the living room, an unexplainable knocking noise. It sounds like it's coming from either the front porch or the attic. We initially thought it was the porch swing, so we removed it, but the knocking continued. We even had the attic checked, but there was nothing there to explain the sound. Additionally, we've had mysterious leaks appear in the ceiling, one over the bathroom toilet and another over the fireplace. No one has been able to find the source of these leaks, which only adds to the unsettling feeling. I've learned to cope with the strange things that happen here, taking it day by day and respecting the possibility of the supernatural. Many of my friends are scared to be in the house alone or in certain rooms. One close friend has witnessed some of these events alongside me, confirming that it's not just my imagination. Whatever is happening in this house, it's a constant reminder that there are things in this world we can't fully understand. When I was just a few months old, my family moved from Texas to a beautiful, secluded home in the Louisiana countryside. At first, we were only renting it, but later the owner sold it to us due to financial troubles. The house was lovely and spacious, with only a few other homes nearby. However, strange things began happening that we couldn't explain, and over time, the place began to feel less like a home. From as far back as I can remember, there was a sense of something else living there, a mother and child. My dad, who often stayed up late watching TV, would sometimes hear what he thought was me crying. He'd head to my room to check on me, but the crying would stop as soon as he reached the hall. Many times, he'd find I hadn't been crying at all. Sometimes I wasn't even in my room. Yet, the crying always seemed to come from that side of the house. We later learned that part of the house, including my room and the hall, had once been part of a different home, moved to the property years ago by a previous owner. When I was 3 or 4, my dad started working overseas, leaving just me, my mom, and my teenage brother and sister at home. I was terrified of my room, constantly feeling watched, especially by the staircase visible from my door. My mom started letting me sleep in her room, but even my sister's boyfriend, who sometimes stayed over, refused to sleep in my room and would always take the couch. One night, He confessed to my mom that he'd heard papers moving in my room. When he got up to check, he saw the papers floating and sifting through the air, as though someone were looking through them. My wind-up toys and a laughing phone would also go off randomly at night. It was as if the little girl enjoyed playing with my things. Once, I even had a dream where she was my best friend. But in the dream, we'd only play in my room or by the staircase. She never wanted to go anywhere else. Eventually, my brother and sister moved out, leaving just me, my mom, and the two ghosts, the mother and daughter who seemed ever-present. There were other unsettling occurrences. My mom once saw a woman in a long brown dress standing on the staircase, blocking her way as she went to clean my brother's old room. Another time, I woke up to hear the creaking of a rocking chair in my mom's room. When I checked, the chair was rocking back and forth, and there was an indentation on the seat, as though someone invisible was sitting there, rocking a baby. After first grade, we moved to Grand Isle, but we'd return to the house on weekends. Strangely, the house seemed even colder and less welcoming with each visit. We installed a fireplace, but the chill was so deep that we once returned to find our plates cracked from the cold, and even my fish had died. As much as I missed the house, I always ended up at a friend's place when we visited. One night, I had a vivid dream. My mom and I were outside in what looked like a sugarcane field. Where our house was built had once been part of a sugarcane plantation. In the dream, 3 men who looked Vietnamese appeared and attacked us. They carried a box they seemed intent on hiding, eventually burying it beside a specific tree near our driveway. The dream was so real that I could pinpoint the tree in real life. Years later, my mom shared a chilling story of her own. One night, she woke to what sounded like a violent fight coming from the other side of the house, though it felt like it was happening right in front of her. She recalled hearing 3 men screaming and saw flashes of a mother and child being harmed, much like my dream, even though I had never told her about it. Friends who visited often reported hearing whispering, seeing shadows, or hearing my toys playing on their own. Oddly, these experiences were always centered around my room or the staircase, even for those who had no idea about the house's haunted history. For a while, my mom and I thought of the ghosts as innocent presences, perhaps just a mother and daughter lingering in the house. But as soon as my mom considered having the house blessed and researching its history, everything took a dark turn. My dad eventually forced us to sell the house, and it seemed that many things began going wrong around that time. In hindsight, we wondered if these spirits were as innocent as we had thought. The house was always plagued with bugs and snakes, and no matter what we did, it was cold and unwelcoming. People rarely wanted to stay for long, yet somehow my mom and I were the only ones who managed to live there for years. After we finally moved, our lives changed for the better. It was a beautiful house, one we'd never find again. But my mom and I have found peace in a smaller, warmer town in southern Louisiana. As it turns out, a nice house doesn't guarantee happiness. I'm not exactly sure where to begin, as there's no real climax to this story, just a series of strange experiences that left me feeling deeply uneasy. My best friend and I had just moved into a new 2-bedroom apartment we were sharing, and it was only a couple of weeks before odd things started happening. The first strange occurrence I noticed was my computer shutting off by itself. It wasn't a regular shutdown either. Everything would turn off, including the speakers and the printer. I initially chalked it up to electrical issues, but the rest of the apartment was unaffected. Even the clocks weren't reset. There was a heavy, restless feeling in the place from day one, but I did my best to brush it off as just the feeling of adjusting to a new place and a new town. Then things escalated. My bedroom door started slamming on its own, for no apparent reason. We tried everything, turning off fans, closing windows, adjusting the central air, but nothing stopped it. The weird part was that we had thick, plush carpet that met the bottom of the door, which should have made it difficult for any draft to slam it. We kept hearing it slam, but neither of us ever saw it happen. That changed one night. I was in my bedroom, getting ready to take a bath. I had just filled the tub and went back into the bedroom to grab my robe. As I was digging through a pile of clothes, I felt a strange pull to look up at the bathroom door. Just as I did, it slammed shut right in front of me. I was so shaken that I abandoned my bath plans and opted to sleep in my friend's room instead. She was calmer about it all, but I was reaching my breaking point. Felt like everything happened in my room. That night, we sat on her bed discussing all these strange events. I had a clear view of my bedroom door from where I sat, and for some reason, I had the strong feeling it was going to slam again. I kept an eye on it from the corner of my eye, but nothing happened, so I tried to shake off the feeling and focus on our conversation. The second I turned my attention back to my friend, the door slammed louder than it ever had before. That was it for me. I was done with my room. I stayed in her room for a few days, but that's when the activity shifted to the kitchen. One night while we were watching TV, I heard water running. I didn't think much of it at first since, living in a complex with over 250 units, we could hear neighbors all around us. But eventually, I realized the sound was close, as if it were coming from inside our apartment. I went to check, and sure enough, the kitchen faucet was on full blast. We spent a while trying to recall if either of us had used the sink, but we hadn't. A few nights later, we were getting ready to leave the apartment. As we walked toward the front door, I noticed my friend staring toward the kitchen with a strange look on her face. I turned to see what she was looking at, and saw that the cabinet where we kept our cups was open, completely empty. Not a single cup was left in there. We just looked at each other, unnerved, and left without saying a word. When we got back that night, I went into my room to grab something. As soon as I opened the door, I saw all the cups from the kitchen scattered across my bedroom floor. At that point, I was beyond scared, and even my friend, who had been the calm one until now, was visibly shaken. Ignoring it wasn't an option anymore. We ended up moving out a few weeks later due to a job transfer, but honestly, I was relieved to leave. I may never know what was behind those strange occurrences, but I was more than happy to leave them behind. I've come to realize there's never been a time in my life where I haven't encountered something paranormal. Growing up in a small town in southern Louisiana, surrounded by bayous, I lived in a house with an unsettling history. Before my father bought it, a religious cult had lived there. According to locals, a young woman in the cult gave birth to a stillborn child, and instead of a funeral, they carried the baby's body around town in an ice chest, asking people to pray for it to come back to life. I didn't know about this until my teenage years, when a friend's mother told me the story as she drove me home one night. I finally understood why I'd always felt a strange energy in that house and why my family experienced unusual events. My room was at the end of a long hallway, and I can't remember a time when I didn't sprint down that hallway to get in or out of my room. The moment I stepped into it, a heaviness would settle over me, twisting my stomach and speeding up my breath. I'd run as fast as I could, then slam the door shut behind me, feeling an instant sense of relief once inside. It was as if something lingered in that hallway, watching. Other odd things happened, too. We would sometimes hear the sounds of children laughing, and, occasionally, the cry of a baby. One night, my best friend was over, and we were heading down the hall to my room. My little brother's room was just off that hallway, but he wasn't home at the time. He was out fishing with a friend. As we passed his open bedroom door, we heard a baby crying. My friend and I froze, then ran outside and waited in the backyard until we had to go back in. It seemed like the paranormal activity targeted me and my brother most of all. My mother had small encounters, but I think she grew used to it over time. My father, who was away working on offshore oil rigs for much of my childhood, never experienced anything. One of the most terrifying encounters I had was when I woke up one night to see a face hovering just inches above mine. It wasn't solid, almost like a mist, but I could make out faint features. Eyes, a nose, a mouth. I was frozen in place, staring, until it suddenly dissipated right before my eyes. I would hear knocking on my bedroom door, open it to find no one there, hear my name called when no one was around, and feel hands on my arms or back. The experiences became part of my daily life. When I was 14, I met a close friend who was a medium. He was older than me, and we developed a brother-sister relationship that's lasted to this day. Talking to him on the phone every day was like an escape from the heavy energy I felt in that house. He assured me that what I was experiencing was real and that my home was intensely haunted. He sensed over 22 spirits in and around it. He also explained that I was an empath, sensitive to spirits, which made me more vulnerable to paranormal experiences. It explained so much, though I wasn't thrilled to hear it. My friend tried to help, performing a cleansing ritual in the house. It seemed to work for a while, but the activity eventually returned. He later told me that the energy was too strong, and he couldn't get rid of all the spirits. I lived there until I graduated high school, when my father finally decided it was time to move. Leaving that house was bittersweet. It had been my home since I was 4, and despite the haunting experiences, I felt an attachment to it, and even to some of the spirits, the ones that brought comfort rather than fear. On the day we moved, I stood in the empty living room, feeling an odd guilt for leaving them behind, as if I were abandoning family. After we moved, our new house was peaceful, without any spirits. I felt free for the first time. It was as if I'd shut down that part of myself that was sensitive to spirits. I lived without paranormal encounters for years. 8 years later, I was living in Washington State, pregnant with my first child. Strangely, I began feeling an intense pull to return to Louisiana. I missed my family, but it was more than that. I felt like something was calling me home. My fiancé and I ultimately decided to move back in October of 2006. Just a month after our return, on November 29th, my life changed forever. My mother, my rock, passed away suddenly. I'd spoken to her just hours before her death. My stepfather found her later that day. The cause was listed as a heart attack, but she was healthy, making it an enormous shock. To this day, I wonder if some intuition, drew me back to be with her one last time. After her funeral, I had a vivid dream in which I looked in a mirror and pulled a large nail from my forehead, revealing a blinking eye where the nail had been. Since then, I've felt as though my sensitivity to spirits has returned stronger than ever. Every place I've lived since then has had its own share of paranormal activity. I've experienced paranormal activity for as long as I can remember. Ever since I was a preteen, around 11 or 12 years old, I've heard voices at night. I usually can't make out individual voices or words, but sometimes I catch a word or a phrase. This has happened everywhere, even in a hospital after I delivered my daughters. I initially thought it might have been due to the painkillers I was given for my C-section, but I'd never reacted to them before, so it didn't make sense. Growing up, I'd often get frustrated because my dad wouldn't let me turn the TV off completely. I'd lie awake, hearing the murmur of voices, convinced it was the TV down the hall. The volume sounded too low to actually hear from my room, but the voices seemed to drift through anyway. When I'd sleep over at other people's houses, it was often quiet, which was a relief. But as I grew older, I realized that the voices were something more than just ambient noise. When I moved into my own home with my husband, I noticed it even more. The TVs and radios would be off, but I'd still hear the voices at night. I'd sometimes get up and wander through the house, from the bedroom down the hall, through the kitchen, dining room, and living room, trying to find the source. We lived out in the country, with our closest neighbors on the other side of a cow pasture. There was no logical explanation for what I was hearing. Then, one day, I happened to watch a TV show featuring a medium. A woman in the audience stood up and explained that she heard voices at night. The medium told her she might have some psychic or medium abilities and that she could choose to listen or ask the voices to leave. I hadn't fully decided what I thought about mediums, but after hearing that, I decided to give it a try. The next time the voices started, I whispered, "I'm tired. Please leave me alone." And they stopped. The following night, they started up again, and I repeated the same phrase. Again, they stopped. Since then, I've learned to mostly ignore them, and I only have to ask them to go away a couple of times a year. Occasionally, they wake me up with loud sounds or snippets of words. I've caught words like mom, brother, or death. Sleeping with a fan or my husband's quiet snoring helps drown them out, but I still sometimes get up and wander the house, only to find that everything is quiet. I've wondered if the sound might be from my daughter's radio or if it's traveling through the vents, but in our current house, we have radiant floor heating and the vents are in the ceiling. The voices are still there, regardless. Thinking back to my childhood home, where I first experienced these voices, I wonder if I passed something along to my youngest daughter. She's 15 now, and her experiences have given me chills. I plan to share her stories as well, but for now, this is what I deal with daily. Sometimes, I hear the voices during the day if everything is very quiet. I've had times when I've been alone at home and thought my family had returned because I could hear talking, only to discover that I'm still alone. I occasionally go through bouts of insomnia, and during these times, if I get up around 3 a.m., I hear the voices even more clearly. Perhaps that's why I keep the TV on during the day, even if it's just background noise. With the TV on, the voices don't start up, and even if I try to listen, I don't hear them. When they speak, they're often too quick and quiet to understand, and sometimes it sounds like they're all talking at once. I'd need them to slow down and be louder to fully make sense of anything. This is just a glimpse into my experience. I've never tried to engage the voices beyond asking them to leave. I'm not sure I'd want to open up to whatever might happen if I did. For now, I'm just learning to live with it. I'm not sure if these experiences would count as paranormal, but I don't believe in coincidences. I think everything happens for a reason. I was raised Christian, and I still am, though I also believe in some New Age ideas that go against what I was taught growing up. While I wouldn't call myself psychic, I've always had a strong intuition. Sometimes, I feel I know what people are thinking or what they might say or do next, even if I don't know them well. I often sense things about animals too, and sometimes, I just have a feeling about things to come without knowing why. One New Age belief I hold is in spirit guides, and I've asked them for signs on 3 occasions. The first time was just to see if it would work. I'd heard about others who received signs, so I decided to ask for one that would be unmistakable. Red foxes are rare where I live. No one had seen one in years, so I asked my spirit guides to send me a red fox. I live by the woods, and one day I was sitting on my patio, reading and enjoying the quiet, when I looked up. There, just 8 feet away at the edge of the trees, stood a red fox, calmly looking at me. Normally, foxes are skittish and avoid people, but this one stayed put, almost like it was meant to be there. After about a minute, it walked back into the woods. I was the only one who saw it, and no one around here saw a red fox again. I'd like to believe that this was my spirit guides sending me a sign. About a year later, during a difficult time in my life, I needed some comfort. I asked my spirit guides to send me a rainbow. I'd only seen a rainbow twice in my life and felt it would be a sign of hope. The next day, after a day of rain, I went out for a walk in my backyard, and there in the sky was a double rainbow. It was beautiful, and though I only asked for a rainbow, I saw it as a double sign. Maybe it was just luck, but I'd like to believe it was more than that. The third time I asked for a sign was when a close friend of mine was very sick. Her favorite flower is the wild goldenrod, and I wanted to bring some to her in the hospital. But goldenrod season had just ended, and I couldn't find any. I asked my spirit guides to send me goldenrods if my friend was going to pull through. The next day, on my way to visit her, I felt an overwhelming urge to turn down a small country road that I normally never take. I'm not sure if it was to delay seeing her so ill or something else, but I followed the urge. About halfway down the road, there in a thicket by the ditch was a small patch of goldenrods. Couldn't believe it. I pulled over, picked the flowers, and cried, partly with relief and partly out of happiness. I took the goldenrods to my friend, who was still very sick but delighted to see the flowers. I didn't tell her about the sign from my spirit guides because I knew she wouldn't believe it. She's a Christian but doesn't hold the same beliefs. The next day, she began to recover. Took time, but she made it. I still think about that urge to turn down that road and the goldenrods waiting there. Was it a coincidence? I don't think so. To me, it was a sign from my spirit guides, reassuring me that my friend would be okay. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. About 9 years ago, when my husband was stationed in Louisiana, we moved off base into a small, charming house in a nearby town. At first, everything seemed normal. Our days were quiet. Our older daughter was in school, and I was usually home with our younger daughter, JC, who was 3 at the time. I was finishing my teaching degree and often let JC watch TV while I worked on homework. One day, after watching Dora the Explorer, JC wandered off to her room, which was common enough. Her attention often drifted to other things after her show ended. A little while later, she came back and told me she had a friend, and asked if her friend could play. Only half listening, I told her, sure, not thinking much of it. Then things started to get strange. Each day at 9:30 a.m., right when Dora the Explorer ended, JC's friend would arrive. She'd look down the hall and say, "Oh, my friend is here," and then run off. Sometimes, even before the show was over, she'd act like she'd heard something, saying her friend was there. Then one day, she asked me, "Can my friend's brother come play too?" I agreed, curious but still unsure what was happening. Soon, both friends were visiting our house daily. I started asking JC more questions and paying attention to her responses. One afternoon, while I was making lunch, I asked her if her friends would like some food too. She told me, "They don't eat." Surprised, I replied, "Everyone eats." But she insisted, "They don't need to eat." Intrigued, I took a camera to her room and asked if I could take a picture of her friends. She paused, listening, and then said, "They're scared of you. They don't want their picture taken." I tried asking a few more times, but each time, she'd say they were still too frightened. While waiting in the car one day to pick up her older sister from school, I asked JC more about her friends. "Where do your friends live?" I asked. She answered, "In the forest." I probed further. "Where in the forest?" Her reply, "In the burned-out Rainbow House." It was an unusual description, especially since Louisiana is covered in forests, and Rainbow House wasn't a term a typical 3-year-old would use. One night, JC asked if her friends could stay over. I agreed, but later, as I stayed up finishing homework, I felt as if I wasn't alone. I heard faint noises behind me, though no one else was awake. I snapped a few pictures, but seeing nothing in them, I eventually deleted them, a decision I now regret. Months later, we were out exploring and drove down a nearby road I hadn't taken before. I wanted to show my husband a fellow teacher's house, but we kept driving. That's when we spotted a burned-out house along the road. It didn't look rainbow exactly, but there was something haunting about it. We slowed down and glanced at each other, both feeling an unspoken connection to JC's burned-out rainbow house in the forest. Another time, I caught JC mid-conversation with her friends. Often, when I'd walk by her room, she'd scold me for scaring them away. So one day I decided to sneak a look. I got down on my hands and knees, quietly crawled down the hall, and peeked around her door. JC was sitting on the floor, her back to me, having a conversation with someone invisible. She'd pause, as if listening, then respond and look as if someone else were there. I noticed 2 sets of ponies on the floor, one in front of her and one directly across, as if someone else was playing too. Then, without turning, JC suddenly said, "Mom, I know you're there. My friend told me. You scared her." I backed out of the room, unsure what to make of it all. These friends were part of JC's life until she started kindergarten. That same year, I began teaching full-time, and the friends seemed to disappear. Today, JC is a teenager and remembers her friends, but doesn't like talking about them. I spent a lot of time thinking about how to begin this next chapter of ghost experiences in my life. This story suddenly came to mind recently, almost like a sign, so I felt it was time to share it. Once I moved out of my parents' house, got married, and started a new life, I thought the hauntings were a thing of the past. But I couldn't have been more wrong. My husband was in the military, and we were transferred to Louisiana, where I became a stay-at-home mom, working toward my teaching certificate. Before becoming a teacher, I had to complete student teaching under the supervision of an experienced classroom teacher. My placement was in an older building from 1956, which had originally been the town's high school before it was repurposed for kindergarten and first grade as the area grew. The layout was simple. One long hallway with classrooms on either side. My assigned classroom was at one end of the hall, away from the main entrance. That's when I began experiencing something strange. Randomly, the door of our classroom would slam shut. The windows were always closed. Living in Louisiana, we rarely opened them because of the humidity, and the classroom doors were usually the only source of air in the hallway, meant to keep it cool. I'd go to open the door each time, expecting to see someone who'd closed it, but the hallway was always empty. This only happened in our classroom. I'd spent time in nearly every room in that building and never experienced anything similar elsewhere. Naturally, the younger kids were frightened each time it happened, gasping in surprise. To reassure them, I started saying, "It's no biggie. It's just Mrs. S's ghost." Mrs. S was the teacher I was working with, and I meant it only as a joke to ease the kids' nerves. One evening, Mrs. S and I were heading to a coworker's house, and she shared a story with me that left me cold. I'd mentioned the door slamming earlier, joking about calling it a ghost, and she paused before opening up about something deeply personal and unsettling. Years ago, she told me, she had a student from a very poor family. The boy's family had no one to care for him after school. One day, he went home alone and tried to get a snack from the fridge. Tragically, the refrigerator had a short, and he was electrocuted. His mother found him when she returned home, and she rushed him to the hospital, but he didn't survive. Mrs. S had gone to the hospital with her pastor, as the mother was not religious and had no family nearby to support her. Mrs. S and her pastor prayed for the little boy, but he never regained consciousness. It was the saddest year she'd ever taught, she said, and her classroom even held a fundraiser to help the boy's mother buy a headstone. But she hadn't been back to see if it was ever placed on his grave. After hearing her story, I could never bring myself to joke about the ghost in her classroom again. That was just one of the unsettling events I experienced in Louisiana, and I'll share more in time, including things that happened in my own home. Looking back, I wonder if there's something about that state that holds on to spirits. It felt like everywhere I went, there was always something just out of sight, waiting to make itself known. I was up late one night, around 2 a.m., working on my computer. I'm a 39-year-old man, and I've always noticed shadowy figures out of the corner of my eye. I'd assumed it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, until a few months ago. I moved into this house about 2 years ago, and the shadow figures seemed more active than usual, especially in my kitchen. Oddly, I only ever noticed them there and always during the day, never at night. But I hadn't thought much about it until that night when everything changed. It was around 2 a.m., and I'd been focused on my screen for about 45 minutes. I wasn't tired, and my eyes weren't strained. Out of the corner of my eye, I suddenly saw her, sitting on my printer about a foot away from me, swinging her feet. She wore a hooded cloak. At first, I didn't turn to look, assuming that, like always, it was just my imagination. I didn't see any clear features, no eyes or face, just the silhouette of what looked like a young girl or a woman, though I was certain it was female. I kept my eyes on my screen but said, "I see you." She kept swinging her feet, still visible out of the corner of my eye. Finally, I turned to look directly at her. Her feet stopped swinging, but she didn't disappear immediately. Instead, she stayed visible for about 8 seconds as we just stared at each other. I began to feel unsettled. I'm a private person, and I didn't like the idea of being watched, even by whatever she was. I got up and turned on the light, but she was already gone. Feeling shaken, I took a few minutes to calm down. 2 cold glasses of water and a sit on my bed to process what had happened. Once I felt a bit more settled, I went back to my computer and resumed working, this time with the light on. But about 10 minutes later, I saw her feet swinging again out of the corner of my eye. Trying not to look directly at her, I asked, "What do you want?" This time, something new happened. Out of my right side vision, another hooded figure appeared, moving closer until it was right next to my shoulder. I turned to look, and it felt as if it was leaning over, either reading what I was typing or staring directly at me. I thought I could feel a shift in temperature, like it was breathing near me, but I couldn't be sure. The moment I looked directly at it, both figures disappeared. It was almost like they were playing with me. I saved my work, shut down my computer, left the light on, and turned on the TV, putting on a comedy to shift my mood. About an hour later, I decided to get a snack, and as I left my room, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure running alongside me, just outside my door, in the same spot where the second figure had stood over my shoulder. I haven't seen them since that night, but even now, it still unsettles me. They didn't feel threatening. It was more like they were curious about me or wanted to see if I could really see them. Maybe they were studying me, or maybe just amused. I can't say. After that night, I also stopped seeing those quick shadowy movements in my kitchen. Maybe it was their way of saying goodbye. I'm left wondering who or what they were and what they wanted. They were always about 3 feet tall, like the height of an average 7-year-old. Even now, I have no answers, but the memory lingers, leaving me curious and a little uneasy. This summer has been an especially challenging one for me. I've always had the ability to sense the presence and emotions of spirits, a sensitivity my parents acknowledge by calling me a sensitive. Even though I've spent a lifetime encountering the paranormal, nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced this summer. It all started in early June, while I was on a trip with my mom, little sister, and a friend in Hilton Head, South Carolina. One night around 2 in the morning, I turned over in bed and saw a man standing at the foot of my bed. He was tall with long, straight hair, but what truly unnerved me were the horns protruding from his head, bone-like, sticking straight out and twisted in the middle. His presence was unlike anything I'd felt before. It was deeply malevolent, leaving me feeling physically sick. He stayed there the entire night, fading in and out, but his presence lingered, unsettling and overwhelming. Later, we went to St. Augustine and visited the lighthouse. When we entered the second room of the cellar, I was hit with an intense spiritual energy. Felt like I'd walked into a wall. My chest tightened. I began to shake. My head pounded, and nausea set in. Whatever spirit was there felt powerful and angry. Unfortunately, my mom, who has had some paranormal experiences but doesn't take them as seriously, decided it was a good time to openly challenge the spirit. She stood in the middle of the room, saying things like, "If you're really here, you'll knock me over." I was so overwhelmed that I started crying, begging her to stop, and then I ran up the stairs. That was the point when things got truly alarming. Once we returned home, I began seeing a specific entity with a unique and unnerving presence. It was somewhat shadow-like, but it looked tangible and solid, with white, glowing eyes and a body that seemed to be melting into the ground. I saw it whenever I was alone, always in the same stance. Arms relaxed, one shoulder lifted higher than the other, staring straight at me. This presence left me so shaken that I still sleep in the living room. Twice I saw it out of this stance. The first time was at night when I was going to my room to get my iPod charger. I nearly bumped into it. It was standing directly in front of my bunk bed with its arms raised high and extended over its head, rocking back and forth. Its movements were unnatural, almost as if the entire room moved along with it. The second time was during the day. As I was walking down the hallway, just as I passed the bathroom, it leaned its head out into my face, catching me off guard. Since June, I've encountered it dozens of times, and each time it terrifies me. My friend thinks it might be trying to protect me, and I can't entirely dismiss that possibility. But if it's here to protect me, why does it take such a terrifying form? Why does its presence feel so threatening? The most recent encounter happened while we were in Texas, driving through the countryside. I suddenly felt something enter the car, and when I glanced to my right, I saw a black shape sitting next to me. The unsettling presence has only grown stronger since then. Now, it seems as if I'm constantly surrounded. I see and feel spirits everywhere, and I'm beginning to hear voices, too. It's not as harmless as it once seemed. I'm always followed, always watched. For the first time in my life, I feel a real, intense fear of the supernatural. I've been spooked and startled before, but never like this. My mom has promised that we'll do whatever it takes to make this better, but I'm uncertain. Cleansing the house might help, but I'm worried it won't keep them from following me wherever I go. It's getting worse, and I honestly don't know what to do anymore. I want to share a story about my family, particularly about my Uncle Earl, who still seems to be with us even years after his passing. Ever since I was young, I was told not to be afraid of him, that he was our playful ghost who would never harm us. Earl was only 13 when he died in 1965, just before the summer and a few months before Hurricane Betsy hit his hometown of New Orleans, Louisiana. Earl was my mother's younger brother, and he was the third child among her siblings. My mother was born in 1950, then came Earl in 1951, Jamie in 1960, and Vincent in 1961. My grandmother was even pregnant with my youngest uncle, Casey, when Earl passed away. Earl's passing was sudden and deeply impacted the family. On the morning of his last day, Earl woke up with a swollen foot and didn't want to go to school. My grandfather, seeing this, suggested he stay home, but my grandmother was strict about school and called a cab for him. Earl was known to be a bit of a dreamer and didn't always pay full attention in class. A nun at his school often treated him harshly, even encouraging other boys to pick fights with him. This hurt Earl deeply, but on this day, the nun showed him kindness. She even brought him lunch, and they laughed and connected in a way they never had before. Earl came home excited and told my grandmother, "I was so wrong about her. She's wonderful." Later that day, he joined his friends to play by the train tracks, a common adventure for the boys in their neighborhood. His best friend, Martin, who lived across the street, was with him. They often walked the tracks, even daring to play chicken with oncoming trains. Tragically, Earl's foot got stuck on the tracks, and he couldn't get free. He was fatally struck by the train just before 5 p.m. My grandmother, who was preparing dinner at the time, had no idea. My grandfather, who called daily around that time to check on her, reached out earlier that day and learned everything was fine. She hadn't yet heard the news. Shortly after, Martin rushed back to the house to tell my grandmother what had happened. My mother, who was 14 at the time, remembers walking out of a store and seeing police cars and ambulances rushing past, thinking, "My God, someone's been hit by a train," not realizing it was her own brother. It wasn't until she returned home that she learned what had happened. My grandmother, showing incredible strength, called the family doctor to be at the house before my grandfather arrived, knowing he'd need support. The family struggled to accept Earl's loss. On the night of his death, my grandmother stayed home with Vincent, who was 3, and Jamie, who was 4. It was around 8 p.m. when the phone rang, and to her shock, it was Earl's voice on the other end, saying, "Mama? Where are you? Everyone's left. You need to come get me." The call ended suddenly, leaving her in disbelief. Earl had only been gone 3 hours. From that night on, Earl's spirit lingered around the house for decades. For the next 25 years, he was seen and felt in various ways. My family has always had a sense that Earl wasn't ready to leave this world, and they left the side gate unlocked, lights on, and back door open for him. Even when my grandparents moved out in 1990, they believed he was still there, so they never sold the house. Over the years, we've experienced countless strange occurrences that reminded us of Earl. My uncle Jamie, who was just 4 when Earl passed, remembers seeing Bubba in the backyard. One day, he became so excited that he ran around shouting, "Bubba! Bubba!" as if Earl was there, playing with him. Vincent, who eventually moved into Earl's old bedroom, recalls seeing his brother standing in the doorway, arms crossed, looking almost amused as if watching over him. It was as if Earl had returned just to be present for his family. My mother also had a chilling experience. Shortly after Earl's death, she and her best friend heard the back door open and footsteps moving up the stairs. Thinking it was an intruder, they called for help, but when Earl's friend Martin checked, there was no one there. They later realized it could have been Earl returning home. Earl's playful spirit continued showing up. For example, Vincent often felt a presence near the bathroom, where he would sometimes see drawers pulled open with his belongings inside, even though no one else was there. Once, while taking a shower, he found the bathroom floor covered in water, only to find it completely dry moments later. In the early 90s, when my sister and I stayed in the house, we experienced strange things ourselves. I lost a hairbrush, only to find it later in a random drawer. My sister had her school items mysteriously rearranged into shapes on the dresser. Earl's favorite box of gun shells, which had gone missing the day he died, suddenly reappeared years later in a bedroom drawer, only to vanish again without explanation. Even neighborhood kids who spent time in the house experienced strange things, like TVs flipping channels by themselves and lights flickering. My grandmother would often laugh, knowing it was likely Earl playing tricks on us. One friend even claimed to see someone peeking out from behind a curtain, only to realize no one else was home at the time. In the past few weeks, I experienced something that may have connected to Earl's presence once again. Late one night, I woke up to see two shadowy figures enter my room. Terrified, I thought they were real intruders, but they disappeared just as mysteriously. The next day, I learned that Martin, Earl's childhood friend, had been arrested for a violent crime. My Uncle Vincent believes it was Earl and Martin's spirits revisiting me. This story of Earl has always held a special place in our family's history. My grandparents believed that Earl was still living in the memories and space he cherished, waiting for the right time to move on. For us, Earl's presence was never scary but comforting, reminding us of the love that endures beyond this world. After Clint shipped out, life for Hope and me settled back to normal, or at least as normal as it could be in our old haunted house. I'd grown fond of seeing the blanket in the tub every morning. It quickly became part of my daily routine. But in Hope's room, something unusual was happening. She was spending more time by herself, sitting cross-legged with her back against the wall, giggling and talking to her baby doll, her imaginary friend. She seemed so attached to this imaginary friend that whenever she did leave her room, she'd hold an invisible hand, skipping, dancing, and playing as if someone were right there beside her. First, it seemed cute, and I thought nothing of it. But as Hope's attachment to her baby grew, so did my concern. Knowing the house was haunted, I couldn't shake a nagging worry for her safety. Then an idea hit me. I'd surprise Hope with her own television to try to distract her. She was thrilled, and I let her choose a TV at a thrift store. A little 18-inch Sony she loved instantly. She giggled, hand in hand with her imaginary friend as she picked it out. When we got home, we turned this into a whole project, decorating the TV with glitter, stickers, and sparkly paint. It was her TV now, and for a while she seemed back to her bubbly self. Hours later, with everything dry, I set the TV up in her room. I hooked up her VHS player and put on her favorite show. As the Powerpuff Girls theme played, I turned to see if Hope was watching. But instead, she was looking at the empty space beside her, smiling at her imaginary friend. "Could you turn it down, Mommy?" she asked sweetly. I did, but my heart sank. Despite my efforts, she was still absorbed by her imaginary friend. I realized then that she'd come around in her own time. This new friend was part of her world, and I'd just have to wait. While Hope remained fixated on her imaginary friend, I couldn't help noticing things myself. Shadows danced in the hallway, and I'd feel that eerie tightening in my chest. Hope's imaginary friend had started to consume my thoughts too, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was more than a simple creation of Hope's imagination. A few days after Clint returned home, I finally saw what Hope had been seeing all along. Hope was away at a friend's house, and Clint was home relaxing, lying around as usual. Suddenly, I felt an overwhelming urge to turn around. I glanced toward the boarded-up window in our room, which had a mirror placed over it. There was Clint, leaning over, arms folded, staring into the mirror with such fascination that it made my heart pound. With quickened breaths and heavy legs, I walked down the hallway toward him. When I reached him, I looked into the mirror, and my heart dropped. In the reflection, where Clint should have been, was the face of a little girl. She had dark brown ringlets around her face, a faded blue dress with a bow on her hip, and she was pointing and smiling at Clint. She looked like a perfect, doll-like child from another time. "That's Hope's little girl," Clint whispered shakily. "I know," I replied, my voice just as unsteady. A moment later, the vision faded, and our room was back to normal. We stood there, frozen, and then Clint pulled me into a long, silent hug. We had seen her. We both saw Hope's baby doll. After that, I stopped worrying about Hope's attachment to her new friend. Somehow, seeing the girl ourselves brought a strange sense of peace. I didn't think she was the blanket ghost, but I did believe she was the one Hope had been talking to. Later, when Hope came home, we asked her what her friend looked like. Her description was exactly what Clint and I had seen: the hair, the dress, even the bow. The only detail that startled me was Hope's last observation. She always has a bloody nose when I see her, she said simply. Since that day, I've come to accept Hope's little friend. She doesn't scare us anymore. Instead, I feel a quiet understanding between us. Oh. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Oh. I woke up that morning with a sense of accomplishment and a hopeful heart. I had finally set boundaries for Hope's night visitor, drawing a line in the sand for the spirit, and I felt proud. Clint was docking in Venice, Louisiana, after being away for 21 days, and soon Hope and I would drive out to pick him up. We'd planned a full week of family activities, taking Hope to the park, watching the new Harry Potter movie in Harvey, and hosting a dinner with Clint's friends. As I rolled over, hugging Clint's pillow, I noticed Hope wasn't beside me. She must have snuck back to her room after I'd fallen asleep. But then, a chill washed over me, a tingling sensation that crept from my spine to my neck. I knew that feeling well. Someone or something was watching me. I could feel its gaze, but this was more intense than usual, and my breath quickened. Reluctantly, I turned to look toward the doorway. There, across the room, was a hazy, smoky figure. Not quite a shadow, but a shape that seemed to draw in and transform the light around it. The bright bathroom light filtered through it, casting deep purple and silver tones on the floor. Long, tendril-like shapes floated around it, swaying as though caught in a breeze. It was eerily beautiful yet terrifying. I could tell this wasn't just any spirit. I was frozen, both by fear and fascination. My heart raced, and goosebumps prickled my skin as I struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. The air filled with a thick, earthy scent, mixed with sweet clover, which made my stomach turn and my lungs ache. Suddenly, the phone rang, and the sound broke the trance. I kept my eyes on the figure as it slowly faded away, dispersing like smoke. When I finally picked up the phone, it was Clint, calling to say he was still on his way but that we should get ready to head out soon. His familiar voice calmed me down, and I walked over to check on Hope. She was sitting cross-legged on her bed, chatting happily with her imaginary baby doll. She had plenty of real dolls, but this baby doll was different, one that only she could see. As an only child, I'd always thought her imaginary friend was harmless, even a healthy way for her to cope with the recent move. But her bond with this baby seemed stronger than I'd expected. As we moved through our morning routine, getting dressed, making the beds, and eating breakfast, Hope suddenly looked up at me and said, "Mommy, you saw him, didn't you?" I tried to brush off the question, redirecting her attention. "Let's call Clint and see if he's ready for us to pick him up," I said with a smile, holding her hand and guiding her to the living room. On the drive to Venice, my mind was racing, but as soon as I saw Clint and wrapped my arms around him, my fears started to melt away. He was my protector, my knight in shining armor, and I felt safe again. The next few days were blissfully normal, apart from the usual blanket mysteriously appearing in the bathtub, a quirk we'd come to accept. Clint called it the heebie-jeebies, but we both tried to laugh it off. For those few days, there were no strange presences or intense feelings, and I let myself believe the spirits might leave us alone. But on Clint's fourth night home, the quiet ended. We were all snuggled on the couch, watching the road to El Dorado, when the kitchen light flicked on by itself. Hope giggled, saying it was her imaginary baby doll, looking for a snack. Clint played along, keeping things lighthearted, and took Hope into the kitchen to make popcorn and cocoa. Meanwhile, I sat there, alone in the living room, feeling the same cold, prickling sensation that had haunted me before. I couldn't stay by myself any longer, so I rushed into the kitchen. Hope and Clint were laughing, oblivious to my nerves. Hope gave me a reassuring hug, noticing how tense I was. I whispered to Clint that I was having the same eerie feeling I'd had the day he'd come home. He held me close and kissed my forehead, offering quiet comfort. After gathering snacks, we returned to the living room, where Clint called out to the house, "Please, whoever you are, don't mess with the appliances or lights. It's not safe for us." His words were calm, almost as if he was talking to a living person. Later that night, After the movie, Clint tucked Hope into bed, making up a story for her involving her imaginary baby doll and her stuffed animals. I leaned against the wall, listening to their laughter and feeling a bit more at ease. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the smoky figure again, this time in the doorway of our bedroom. I gestured for Clint to come over. He approached, his jaw clenched and his muscles tensed as he stared at the figure with me. I could feel his grip on my hand tighten, a silent acknowledgement that he saw it too. The figure vanished just as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving us both shaken. Clint looked at me, and with a nervous, almost astonished grin, whispered, "Our house is haunted. We need to find out who lived here before us." So we did. We learned that the house had been repossessed in the early 1970s. The owner, who had rented it out for years without living in it himself, shared that previous tenants had reported seeing a little girl who would move things around and a man who was known to push or touch people. The little girl had been known to hide things in the tub, while the man was often aggressive. We soon realized these were just two of the spirits we'd encountered. There seemed to be at least 5 entities in the house. While most were passive, 3 showed more violent tendencies. Though I was never harmed directly, several of our guests, as well as Clint, experienced unsettling encounters that couldn't be explained. Our journey to becoming a family was shadowed by these spirits, each encounter a reminder that we were never truly alone in that house. But with each incident, our bond grew stronger, and we learned to face the unknown together, knowing that no matter what happened, we would protect each other. 2010 was a grueling year for the hard-working folks of Louisiana. The oil spill and the following moratorium put countless people, myself included, out of work. Ironically, many of us found temporary jobs fighting the very spill that cost us our livelihood. I was fortunate enough to land a security position in Port Fourchon, LA. It was there that I met Dustin. Like me, he worked long stretches away from home, and we became fast friends. It was a lonely way to make a living, so I was genuinely happy for him when he arranged for his girlfriend to stay at the beach house he and a coworker were renting. Every day, Dustin would get a call from her, and it was clear they were head over heels for each other. I'd cover for him as he'd wander off to find some privacy whenever she called. But one day, Dustin returned to our post looking confused instead of his usual cheerful self. When I asked what was wrong, he told me something that got my attention. Apparently, his girlfriend had sent him a playful photo straight from the shower. When he didn't respond, she called to ask, "Well, what do you think?" Dustin was puzzled. He hadn't received the photo. "About what?" he replied. Just as he was about to explain, he heard a strange crackling noise and a high-pitched squelch. Then, in a guttural, growling voice, someone or something interrupted. "Yes, it was beautiful." They were both stunned, but it got worse. Heavy, angry breathing filled the line, along with throaty, animalistic growls that grew louder and more aggressive before suddenly cutting out, leaving them in silence. During the whole ordeal, neither could hear each other. Dustin was understandably shaken, but I was fascinated. I told him he'd had a real paranormal experience, and I envied him for it. At that point, I hadn't encountered anything paranormal since I was a kid. The next day, Dustin shared more details. His girlfriend told him that after their call, she'd noticed handprints on the steamed-up bathroom mirror. Though the prints were faint as the mirror cooled, they looked disturbingly like someone's hands. She even called his roommate to check them out, and he admitted that he'd heard strange sounds at night, the cabinets opening, the toilet flushing over and over. One night, he swore someone climbed into bed with him, which prompted him to start sleeping on the couch. Time passed, and though nothing more happened, Dustin ultimately chose not to renew his contract and decided to return home. I, on the other hand, stayed on for the paycheck. I was eventually reassigned to a more isolated post, working alone with my coworker stationed on the far side of our area. Near the end of my tri-weekly shift, I made a call home to plan my week off, and got a surprise I hadn't expected. I heard the same squelching noise Dustin described and knew instantly what was about to happen. A growl rumbled through the phone, so I asked, "Who's this?" A tirade of angry-sounding words, in a language I couldn't place, poured through the line. It was like hearing someone rant through a long pipe, muffled but intense. I'm of French Indian heritage, and while I'm no expert in native languages, something about it felt hauntingly familiar. I couldn't understand a word, but it was clearly furious. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the voice vanished. It was only my second day in New Orleans, a trip I'd been looking forward to for ages. Coming from Georgia, I'd always felt a kinship with the Crescent City, almost like a sister city to Savannah. Walking through the French Quarter felt strangely familiar, like a home away from home. Though Mardi Gras was still 3 days away, the city was already alive with celebration. The Saints were in the Super Bowl, and the party had started early. My husband, Ken, and I had a leisurely breakfast at the Court of Two Sisters, then set out to explore. We wandered hand in hand, stopping to enjoy street musicians and letting the atmosphere guide us. Eventually, we found ourselves on Royal Street. Royal Street was breathtaking, a historic avenue lined with antique shops and beautiful old homes. But as we approached an intersection, something shifted. Suddenly, the weight of the Mardi Gras beads around my neck felt overwhelming, like they were pressing down on me. I had to stop. I began to feel panicked and sick, but Ken thought maybe I just had a bit too much to drink. The pressure grew unbearable, though, like the beads were choking me, and my head throbbed painfully. Despite trying to keep it together, I couldn't hide my distress. Frantically, I started pulling the beads over my head, letting them fall to the ground. Ken quickly came to my aid, helping me remove the tangled strands. He took my hand and led me across the street, but as we started to cross, a bird suddenly swooped at my head. Startled, I watched as it flew to the railing of a second-story balcony on a gray building nearby. The moment I saw that house, I knew it was the source of my anxiety. My fear was almost paralyzing, and as Ken tried to get me to sit down, I managed to gasp, "No, it's that house. Get me away from here." Ken looked alarmed, but he didn't hesitate. Okay, he said. "I'll get you out of here." As we walked away, I turned back for one last look, and a wave of dizziness and roaring pain in my head nearly took me down. By the time we'd moved a couple of blocks away, the panic started to ease. Ken held me close, rubbing my back until I calmed down. "What the hell happened back there?" he asked, concerned. I could only shake my head. "I don't know. Maybe I had a panic attack?" I'd never had one before, but I couldn't explain what I just experienced. It had come out of nowhere, turning me from thrilled to terrified in seconds. Ken suggested we head back to the hotel, but I refused to go back down Royal Street. He thought I was being ridiculous, but he humored me, taking the longer route without complaint. Back at the hotel, Ken admitted how worried he'd been, saying he'd never seen me like that. He guessed it might have been something I'd eaten or a reaction to a drink. Not wanting to sound crazy, I reluctantly agreed, and we let it go. The next day, while planning our evening, we found a brochure about city tours. As we flipped through it, there it was, the same house that had filled me with dread. The brochure called it the LaLaurie House, describing it as New Orleans' most haunted house, notorious for torture and mass murder. According to the history, Madame LaLaurie was known to practice voodoo, and her horrors came to light after an enslaved person, chained by the neck in the kitchen, set fire to the house to escape. When rescuers entered, they discovered mutilated bodies of other slaves, some dead and some alive, bound and tortured in unimaginable ways. Some had broken and reset limbs, while others were found with eyes and lips sewn shut, like human voodoo dolls. I knew then, without a doubt, that the history of that house had reached out and gripped me in the street that day. I couldn't decide if it had been an encounter with Madame LaLaurie's malevolent spirit or a chilling connection to the horrors of the past. But whatever it was, I'd felt it all too clearly. Since I was 2, I've always experienced spirits and paranormal events. My earliest memory of it is when I was 6, talking with my great-great-grandfather on a swing set in my backyard. He had passed away when I was only 1, so my family was shocked when I started describing him accurately and having conversations with him out of the blue. I hadn't known his name, but I knew it was him. He once appeared to me, and I got so scared that I ran inside. Since then, I haven't seen spirits, but I've certainly heard and felt them. One place was especially active, my grandmother's house. Known for being haunted since my mom and her siblings were young, it was always a bit spooky. Toys would move on their own, footsteps echoed down empty halls, and sometimes, I'd feel someone sit on the bed beside me. One time, I even saw throw pillows fly across the room. Eventually, my grandparents moved, and the experiences faded, until years later when I found an old Ouija board in my aunt's things. At 15, my brother and I, out of curiosity, decided to try the board, not thinking much of it beyond asking a few questions. At one point, the planchette started moving without our hands on it, spelling out answers. Terrified, we ended the session and stored it in my closet. For days, the closet was freezing, and the light would flicker. My mom, also a believer, decided it was best to get rid of the board. We tried burning it, soaking it in lighter fluid, but oddly, it wouldn't burn. The fire just danced on the surface, not even charring it. We ended up breaking it into pieces and throwing it away. Afterward, everything was calm, but I hadn't learned my lesson. At 19, a friend and I bought a new Ouija board from a toy store and tried it again. This time, I stored it in my closet afterward, but for 2 weeks, I felt inexplicably sad whenever I was in my room. Once I got rid of the board, the strange feelings disappeared. Now, years later at 23, I found myself drawn to the idea again. I researched everything about Ouija boards, stories, rules, origins, and tips before purchasing a vintage 1960s board. The day it arrived, I woke up suddenly, sensing its arrival before I even checked the door. I felt a gust of cold air when I opened the package, but instead of fear, I felt thrilled. That night, with my mom, younger brother, and friend Kelly, we set up in Kelly's apartment. We turned off electronics, lit white candles, said a protection prayer, and began. The first session was slow, the planchette barely moving to yes before it went off the board. Remembering what I'd read, I ended the session immediately. After a break, Kelly and I tried again, but nothing happened. Finally, my brother and I blindfolded ourselves for a more honest attempt, with my mom writing down the letters for us. We asked if any spirits were present, and it moved to yes. When we asked its name, it spelled VIF, possibly initials. As the planchette hovered, we felt a tingle. My mom suddenly said, "The board is spinning." When we took off our blindfolds, she explained that the entire board had moved in circles. Freaked out, we closed the session. Later, back at my grandparents' house, I set up secretly in the spare room. My brother joined, and this time the board seemed more responsive. When we asked for the spirit's full name, it spelled Vincent and gave a birth year of 1937. Oddly, I had those details in mind before I asked. The candles flickered wildly, unnerving my brother, but when he turned on the light, nothing else happened. For days I felt unsettled. Then one night, while watching TV in bed, I noticed a shadow on the wall. Thinking it was something in the room, I waved my hand to check, and my shadow moved as expected. But soon, I heard what sounded like footsteps dragging down the hall. Expecting to see one of my grandparents, I opened the door. No one was there. After closing it, I heard the sound again. I turned on the light and, not hearing it again, tried to relax. But then, I felt my hair being lightly brushed to the side, as if someone were playing with it. The experience was unsettling but not terrifying. I grabbed my rosary, prayed, sprinkled holy water around the room, and eventually fell into a light sleep. I didn't get much rest, but I've decided to keep the board. I believe it's a way to explore these experiences that have followed me since childhood. I don't feel that anything harmful is around, and I don't intend to use the board in a disrespectful way. My plan is to continue learning and exploring these mysteries, balancing curiosity with caution. As I delve deeper, I'll keep sharing updates on what I find. Last night, I woke up suddenly to the sound of someone running toward me. Instinctively, I turned on my light, thinking my son was coming to get in bed with me, as he often does around 3 a.m. I heard a door creak, so I went to meet him at the bedroom door and called his name. But when I stepped out, no one was there. Feeling a chill, I hurried to his room, only to find him sound asleep. The house was silent, Yet I had the strange sensation I wasn't alone. My husband is out of town, and calling him in the middle of the night would likely just add to the crazy things he files away about me. This wasn't my first encounter with the supernatural. They've happened since I was 3. As a Christian, I understand there's a supernatural element to life. My faith and the changes it's brought to me feel like proof that the unseen world is very real. So, while I'm not afraid of supernatural things, I do recognize their mystery and the limits of our understanding. I left a hallway light on in case my son decided to join me, and eventually, I drifted back to sleep. Minutes later, he did come in. The next day, I was watching a movie on the couch when he suddenly ran out of his room, looking unsettled. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me things were moving in his room and that he'd heard the voice. My son is only 4. We've never discussed these kinds of experiences with him or let him watch anything scary. Curious, I asked what he meant by the voice, and he replied, "The voice that calls me mommy." He explained that he often hears it calling his name, and at first he thought it was me or his dad trying different voices, but each time he checked with us we hadn't called him. The voice had been waking him up at night and urging him to come to my room, which explained his frequent early morning visits. What really unsettled me, though, was his mention of footsteps. He told me that he often hears someone walking around the house at night when everyone's asleep. At first, he thought it was me checking on him, but when he'd look, I wouldn't be there. His room is on the opposite side of the house from mine, so this revelation gave me chills. For about a month, I'd also been hearing heavy, loud footsteps at night. Not just faint sounds, but almost like someone stomping. My husband heard it once, too, and tried to convince me it was thunder, until we checked and saw a clear, star-filled sky. Though he's a skeptic, he's seen enough since we've been together to know something is going on. This is our 3rd house since we married, and strange occurrences happened here and in house number 1. Oddly enough, we had no issues in house number 2, but things picked up again after we moved here to Abita Springs, Louisiana, a town known for its haunted history. Our house is only 5 years old, built post-Katrina on previously untouched land. It's rural and quiet, which makes the disturbances all the more noticeable. In the past month, we've also had strange electrical issues. Despite the house's young age, every time something odd happens, electrical glitches seem to follow. A few days ago, 3 light bulbs went out within minutes of each other. Last Sunday, 3 out of 5 smoke alarms went off at the same time, even though there was no smoke. We replaced the batteries, but they went off again soon after. Right now, they're turned off completely. It could all be a coincidence. Yet it's hard to ignore that these incidents seem tied to the strange events in our house. I don't know what's behind these occurrences, but living in Abita Springs, a town with a deep, haunted history, does make me wonder. And though I'm not afraid, I can't deny that something beyond our understanding is happening here. When I was just a few months old, my family moved from Texas into a beautiful, secluded home in rural Louisiana. At first, we rented it, but later, the owner sold it to us after it went into bankruptcy. The house had an unusual history. A part of it, including my room and hallway, was originally a separate old house that a doctor had bought and moved to this location before adding on to it. From early on, strange things happened. My dad, who stayed up late watching TV, would sometimes hear what sounded like a baby crying, coming from my side of the house. He'd go to check on me, but as soon as he reached the hall, the crying would stop. This happened multiple times, and each time he'd find me sound asleep. Occasionally, I wasn't even home, yet the cries continued. It was always the sound of a baby crying, coming from my side of the house. By the time I was 3 or 4, my dad had started working overseas, leaving just my mom, my teenage siblings, and me. I'd become so scared of my room that my mom let me sleep with her, and my sister's boyfriend, William, would sometimes stay over. My mom would offer him my room, but he always refused, opting to sleep on the couch instead. One day, William finally admitted why. One night, he'd heard rustling and entered my room, only to see papers from my drawings floating in the air, as if someone was looking through them. There were also toys that would mysteriously wind up and go off during the night, especially a laughing phone. It seemed like an unseen little girl loved playing with my things. One night, I dreamed about a young girl who was my best friend, but she would only play with me near the staircase and in my room, never anywhere else. As my brother and sister eventually moved out, it was just my mom, me, and two mysterious presences, a mother and a daughter we came to believe. My mom once saw a lady in a long brown dress standing on the staircase, blocking her way upstairs. Another time, I woke to the sound of a creaking chair coming from my mom's room. When I went in, the rocking chair was moving back and forth with an indentation in the seat, as if someone had been sitting there rocking a baby. When I was in first grade, we moved to Grand Isle, visiting the house only on weekends. After we left, it was never the same. No matter what, the house was cold when we'd return, to the point that our plates cracked, and my fish died from the chill. The place felt heavy and eerie. I missed it, but I couldn't bring myself to stay long. I'd always end up at a friend's house instead. One night, I had a vivid dream. In it, my mom and I were outside, and three men with an Asian appearance, possibly Vietnamese, attacked us. Our yard was a sugarcane field, with everything covered in tall stalks except for our driveway and a single tree. The men killed us and buried a box next to the tree. When I awoke, I knew exactly which tree it was, but we'd moved before I could investigate. Later, during a conversation, my mom told me that she'd once awoken to the sounds of a violent fight, with three men yelling and screaming on the other side of the house, yet it felt as if it were happening right in front of her. She sensed they were killing a mother and daughter. Her description matched my dream. The men seemed Vietnamese, and there was an intense, chilling energy. I had never told her about the dream before. Others who visited the house also reported strange experiences. They'd hear whispering, see shadows, and hear my toys being played with, always near my room or the staircase. It was as if they knew the house was haunted, with odd activity focused around my room, even if they didn't know the details. At first, my mom and I thought we were dealing with two innocent spirits, a mother and daughter. But as soon as my mom considered blessing the house and researching its history, things turned chaotic. We were forced to sell the house, and everything seemed to go wrong. In hindsight, we wondered if the spirits were ever as benign as we thought. Despite its beauty, there was always something unsettling about that place. The cold, the constant presence of bugs and snakes, and the way people felt compelled to leave, everyone except my mom and me. Ultimately, we moved away, and our lives improved. While that house was unique and beautiful, we realized that peace and comfort meant far more than any material value. Now, in a quiet town in southern Louisiana, we found happiness in a simpler home, proving, after all, that money can't buy happiness. You may want to read my other story first to understand what I think I'm seeing now, 8 years later. I'm 16 now, and until a few months ago, I thought I had left whatever was haunting me at my old house. It all began the night after my friend was hit by a car. He wasn't killed, but he fractured his back in several places. Since it seemed intentional, I was terrified that something worse could happen. I barely slept for a week, and when I did, I was plagued by nightmares. I kept dreaming of ghosts and demons haunting me and violently attacking my boyfriend. I'm not sure how the dreams connect to my friend's injury, but the fear and lack of sleep were taking a toll. One morning, while making something to eat, I glanced through our large glass front doors and saw a black shadow in the shape of a man. When I looked again, it was gone. I dismissed it, figuring it was just a result of my exhausted mind playing tricks. But the nightmares continued. Less than a week later, I saw the shadow again, and this time I was certain. I'd woken up with the sensation of something grabbing my ankle, like the startle of falling in a dream. As I sat up to grab water from my nightstand, I looked back to see the dark figure standing at the foot of my bed. I blinked, but it stayed, looming for a few more seconds before disappearing. I was frozen, feeling watched, like I was back in my old house. The same uneasy, unsafe feeling I used to have. I broke down, crying, and couldn't sleep the rest of the night. About 2 months passed with nothing, and I started to think it was just a vivid nightmare. But then I stayed at my mom's boyfriend's house a few hours away, and something happened that I couldn't ignore. We were all sleeping in the same room, my mom and her boyfriend in their bed, and me on the couch. I woke up in the middle of the night, which wasn't unusual since I often get up for water. Not wanting to get up, I lay back down to fall asleep again. As I started to doze off, I felt a hand grip my shoulder. Facing the back of the sofa, I assumed it was my mom and mumbled, "Leave me alone. I'm sleeping." Then, I heard a voice respond, "No, I'm never leaving." It was the most menacing, evil voice I have ever heard. Low, guttural. A deep growl that didn't sound remotely human. Even thinking about it now chills me. That encounter was about 2 months ago, and I haven't seen the shadowed man since. But I've had dreams where I'm possessed, lying in bed, violently shaking and moaning, only waking up because I can feel myself shaking. I keep hoping that this is the end, but something tells me it's not over. I spoke with my priest, who suggested it might be demons taking advantage of my fears. Initially, I was scared for my friend's life, which would make sense, but that fear has long passed. I can't figure out why the shadowed man is still here or what he wants. A few weeks ago, I shared my story here, hoping for insights about the strange shadowy figure haunting me. After reading people's comments suggesting it might be unrelated to my past, I can see why it seemed that way. My experiences in the old house felt like a haunting, but what I'm encountering now feels darker. Something that I'm convinced is demonic. I left out some personal details before, but at this point I just need answers. When I was just a few months old, my family moved from Texas to a large, secluded house in the Louisiana countryside. It was an old house, slightly run down, and had been recently foreclosed, which made it a tempting offer. Soon after we moved in, odd things started happening. My parents had heard that renovations could disturb resting spirits, so they thought that any strange activity would die down eventually. Didn't. My dad would often hear what sounded like a baby crying at night. Since I was just a baby, he assumed it was me, but each time he came to check, the crying would stop before he reached my room, and he'd find me sleeping peacefully. Sometimes, he'd hear the cries when I wasn't even home, yet it always came from my room. When I was about 2 or 3, my dad started working overseas, leaving just me, my mom, and my older brother and sister. The activity increased. My sister's boyfriend once saw all my drawings floating in midair, as though someone were flipping through them. My toys, both electronic and wind-up, would go off by themselves at night, filling the air with random sounds and laughter. Most of the activity seemed to center around my room, the hallway, and the staircase across from my door. The nightmare reached another level between the ages of 3 and 4. My brother began to act strangely, and during that year he sexually abused me. When my mom found out, he claimed that voices had told him to do it. She thought he was lying, but took him to a hospital and counselors, where they found nothing wrong with him. Eventually, my brother and sister moved out, leaving just my mom and me in the house. One day, while cleaning out my brother's room, I found his journal. He wrote about hearing voices and even seeing glowing eyes in the dark. My mom and I came to believe the house was haunted by a mother and daughter. She once saw a woman in a long dress standing on the stairs, and I'd occasionally see the rocking chair in her room moving by itself, as if an unseen woman were rocking a baby. In first grade, my mom and I moved away, but we returned to visit on weekends. Each time we went back, the house felt more hostile. It was always cold and unsettling. At the end of first grade, we moved back in full-time, and I stayed the entire second grade year, but it only felt stranger. Things moved, shadows lingered, and my mom saw a full-bodied apparition of a woman on the stairs. One night, I had a vivid nightmare in which my mom and I were brutally murdered by 3 Vietnamese men in a field of sugarcane. I brushed it off as just a nightmare, but a few years later, when my mom and I discussed the strange events in the house, she told me about an experience she had one night. She'd woken to the sounds of a struggle, the voices of a woman, a child, and 3 men speaking in what she described as a Vietnamese or Asian-sounding language. I had never told her about my dream, yet her description matched it exactly. My mom eventually decided to have the house blessed, but as soon as she made this decision, the disturbances increased. My dad suddenly insisted we sell the house, and I agreed. I couldn't stand it any longer. The place that had once felt like home had turned into something terrifying, and I was ready to leave it all behind. Now, years later, the dark presence seems to have returned. It began the night after my friend was intentionally hit by a car and severely injured. I was terrified something might happen again, and for a week, I barely slept, haunted by nightmares of ghosts and demons attacking me and my boyfriend. One morning, as I was in the kitchen, I glanced outside through the glass door and saw a black shadow in the shape of a man. When I looked again, it was gone. I brushed it off as exhaustion, but soon I'd know it was real. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt something grab my ankle, jolting me awake. At the foot of my bed, I saw the same shadowed figure, watching me. I froze in terror as it slowly vanished. I broke down crying and didn't sleep at all that night. 2 months passed without incident, and I started to believe it was just a vivid nightmare. But while staying at my mom's boyfriend's house, I had another chilling encounter. I woke up in the middle of the night and felt a hand grip my shoulder. Assuming it was my mom, I mumbled, "Leave me alone. I'm sleeping." Then, I heard a voice, dark, growling, and terrifying, reply, "No, I'm never leaving." The voice was nothing like in horror movies. It was raw and evil, leaving me paralyzed in fear. Since then, I've had recurring dreams where I feel possessed, violently shaking and moaning until I wake myself up. I thought it might finally be over, but a few days ago, I was walking my dog on the beach and decided to take a photo of our shadows. When I looked, there was a third shadow, a man's figure next to mine. There were no trees, buildings, or other people around, and the shadow was distinct. Talking to my sister recently, I learned she has also seen a shadowed figure and has had similar nightmares. That means all three of us, my brother, sister, and I, have experienced these encounters, making me wonder if this is some kind of family curse. I'm sharing this in the hope that someone might have advice or suggestions. I'm desperate to understand what's happening and to end this haunting presence. If anyone can help, I'd be incredibly grateful.